Well, good morning and welcome to the study session of the East Bay Regional Park Districts on this date, May 12th, 2023. We're beginning today at 10:05. Welcome, everyone. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll?
Yes, President Waspy. Director Rosario.
Here.
Director Eccles.
Present.
Director Coffey.
Present.
Director Mercurio.
Here.
Director Sanwan.
Here.
Director Corbett.
Here.
President Waspy.
Here.
General Manager Landreth.
Here.
And General Counsel Brigham.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Today's meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act. This meeting is held in a study session format to encourage board member comment and discussion. However, per the requirements of the Brown Act, no formal actions will be taken at this study session. Therefore, any items requiring formal board action will be referred to the future Board of Directors meetings for consideration. We're providing live audio and video streaming, and we welcome your participation. Members of the public wishing to make a public comment can do so via live stream or live via Zoom by submitting email or coming in person to this meeting or by leaving a voicemail. This information is noted on the agenda. And if there are no questions from anyone anywhere, we will continue with the meeting. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments?
No, President Waspy, we have not received any.
All right, thank you. We have no public comments, then we'll move to the meat of the meeting. And that is the capital improvement projects that we're looking forward to. And we'll look for an opening from our general manager.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. And thanks for your patience. And we're trying another new setup here. It's a little cozy, so hopefully okay. Everyone likes each other. So we're scheduled today to go until 1 o'clock. We have quite a bit that we want to cover and really to try to make this interactive. And AGM Wysocki is going to be our leader for the day here, but I'm just going to kick us off and then hand it over to him and to Ren. This is really meant to be a follow-up to the discussion that we had last summer around the capital projects and starting to put some structure around how we prioritize them, the process, and you all, just to remind you, and Ken's going to get into it in a minute, adopted your policy last summer, which we were very grateful for, with a lot of thought and interaction and feedback from the board. And then that resulted in the adoption of the prioritization matrix that we took our first crack at prioritizing or scoring projects last year. And that led into your proposed budget last year. So this is really meant to be a follow-up to that, an opportunity for Ken and Ren to talk about some of the accomplishments from the last year on some projects, to reaffirm that policy and the matrix, and really to get some feedback from the board on the overall process for your capital projects. They have a section where they really do want to talk a little bit about just board involvement and capacity of our staff. As you all know, I think probably before I walked in the door here, the very clear direction from this body that you wanted to have more involvement in policy decisions around capital projects and being brought in early and often on projects within your ward. So I'm really pleased. Staff has made a lot of headway in the last 2 years towards that end. We acknowledge we can do even better. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that on touch points with the board. And then ultimately, our big goal is to get ourselves to a real 5-year capital improvement plan, which is takes several years to get there, knowing how many projects we already have in the queue. Lastly, is to feed off of the discussion that we had at the end of the land session around the capital funding. So we kind of dropped a little bit of a bomb on you on purpose around Measure WW with our recommendation around providing possibly some more flexibility within the bond dollars that you have already issued, so that we can move much more quickly through the pipeline of projects that are already in the queue. And we'll talk about that in a minute with some specific examples. One thing I do want to say of what this isn't, this is not really the opportunity to go through the long list of capital projects that are either in process in your ward or you want to be in process in your ward. As we talked about before, in July, when we have the opportunity to come back in the study session with the board to talk about your priorities, we will have that opportunity where we can talk about specific projects. And next month, we will be coming back with the table that we produced last summer with the priorities that you all had and the items that you wanted us to prioritize. Claire will come back with a status update on all of those items. So you'll see that at the study session next month. And we'll have each of the AGMs will be able to get up and do the similar presentation to what they did last summer, of kind of talking a little bit about the state of their divisions, which the feedback from you all was that you found that to be useful. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Ken. Lots to cover. And before they even start, I just want to say thank you to Ken and his entire team, because they have put a tremendous amount of work into today's session with a lot of content and a lot of opportunities for them to get feedback from the board. So go ahead.
Thank you. I went too far there. All right. Good morning. Good morning, President Waspy, fellow board members. My name is Ken Wysocki. I'm the Assistant General Manager of Acquisition, Stewardship, and Development. Welcome to our study session. Our focus will be on capital improvement projects. I hope this session is interactive, and we encourage your questions and comments during the presentations. My philosophy is when you know better, you do better. Ren Bates is the acting chief of design and construction who will be doing most of the presentation today. But there are a couple of questions I want you to keep in mind as we. Hold on. There it is. Questions I want you to keep in mind as we during the presentation today. And first question is, what are your thoughts on the board approved capital project prioritization criteria? Secondly, is the process of prioritization and a 5-year CIP development clear and thorough? And lastly, based on what you hear today, what are your thoughts on aggregating WW development funds? So I'd like to introduce Ren Bates.
Thanks, Ken. Just get set up here. Good morning, board members. It's my pleasure to be here to talk about capital improvement projects, prioritization policy, and get your feedback on all of those things. Before I get, so here's sort of our agenda items. There's 3 sort of topics that were touched on by the GM. Before I dive into those, I would like to, before I get started, thank the GM, Ken, Deborah, the AGM Finance for their guiding hand in getting this study session going and providing us all that. I also like to thank the design and construction staff for their support, and specifically Eva Rose Levitt, who's the landscape architect, who helped pull together the PowerPoint, Katie Quick, who is acting admin analyst 1 to do a lot of data analysis for this, and Sabrina Pinnell, who's she's our administrative supervisor in ASD. She did a lot of the pulling together of these things that are all in front of you now. So with that, we'll begin. As the GM said, presentation is a strong word. I'd like this to be interactive. This is a study session. We're here to sort of discuss these things. So bearing in mind those overarching questions that Ken provided at the very beginning, I'd like, if you have questions specifically about what I'm talking about, please feel free to interject. Tell me what does not make sense, where we're headed. The 3 topics in front of you. First, we'll talk about the project prioritization and the policy that was adopted. I'll go over those criteria, kind of give you the process by which we will utilize those criteria to score. Then we'll talk about how that can inform a 5-year capital improvement plan, what the difference between that and our budget book is, and why staff thinks that it's a good idea to develop that, in addition to the fact that it's in our master plan. Then we'll go through project delivery. I'll introduce or inform you about our design and construction team, kind of who all's involved in that, what we do as a department in the agency, and how we interact with other departments to deliver all of these improvement projects. And then lastly, we'll talk about funding and how we do these funds with both general fund money and how we get to more specific grant funding and the implications that those different types of fundings have on these projects. So first, we'll kick off with the project prioritization and how that will inform our 5-year CIP. So as a reminder, as it's been previously stated in August, you adopted a policy. So we'll review those criteria. And as I mentioned, we'll go over the questions that we have for each of those criteria in terms of how we score those and what those, the procedure we're using to move that forward. And as it says, it has been stated, this is development. So we're just kicking this off so we can change the procedure as we move along. This is kind of how we've used it thus far and how we plan to use it forward. And then talk about how they were utilized for the last budget book and then how we can use those scores to develop the 5-year CIP. So in front of you are the first criteria of the evaluation, the criteria of the prioritization policy. And this is a great framework. I like that it's been suggested. I do want to state or editorialize from my own point of view here for a minute that working for the Park District is an amazing place and we do have a lot of work and we have to prioritize it. But what we're prioritizing is parks and open space. It's a pretty awesome place to work from my point of view, because we're not trying to fight with hospitals, libraries, and all of these other things. It's kind of a blessing to me that all we have to worry about is how we can conserve open space, provide public access to it. And so it's pretty amazing that these are our criteria and this is what we have to argue and fight over. So I'll just put that in as my own editorial bit at the beginning. So let's go through these. Again, these are setups for scoring. So what I'm going to go through with these.
I think you have a question.
Sure.
Right. Before we go into this, I'm really interested in knowing. So there's a assigned point value for each one of these. When we go through the process of rating a project, is it possible to get some portion of the full amount?
No.
And if so, no. Okay.
We are trying. So that's a great question to lead into this. So it's as you see, there are scores for these. The thought process is that could become subjective, and we're trying to objectify or get these to a point of defensible sort of prioritization of how these are the district's goals. This is why we do it, and have backing to it. So these are not portions of these. These are all or nothing scores, and they're based on answers to a few questions that I'll discuss with you now for each one of these criteria in terms of these are the questions that are yes, no, and then looking at those with a justification to those, then it would get scored as an all or nothing. And so then the total sum is 135. And then, so I'll get into how we're going to do that process after we kind of go through these criteria. But yeah, to answer your question right off the bat, Director Mercurio, it's all or nothing for those scores for criteria. So, I guess we should define a capital project. I think we all kind of know what it is, but for the sake of our prioritization policy, it's defined as a project which develops, improves, and maintains a Park District asset as defined by the Park District's asset policy, which was included in your packet. This can include natural and built infrastructure such as visitor use facilities, restoration, utilities, and trails. So I will also add is we have a lot of projects in our project budget book, and we do development on projects that are not necessarily on the district's land. Those are other than asset. We won't get into that too much. For all intents and purposes, we treat those and prioritize those much the same way as we do to the projects that we capitalize. And if you're intrigued by that, if you look at the project numbers in the project budget book, if it starts with a 5, that's an other than asset. And if it's a 1, that's a capitalized district asset. So maybe too much in the weeds on that, but I just want to share with you kind of the background and the overall compass of that. So an essential project is the first category here. So you can read the criteria there. I won't read them all the way through, but in terms of that, so process-wise, the goal is that when we get into this, this next year, the process for this will be, let me just jump ahead because now we can see how it goes. The first stab will be taken by the chiefs of all of the departments on the slide here. So stewardship, planning, trails, GIS, management services, maintenance and skilled trades, park operations, and design and construction. We will take the accumulation of projects that come in, and the project list comes in many ways. Design and construction has design requests. And so in the past month, I've probably received 3 or 4 of those at a minimum already. Our workload has about 11 of them from last year. So projects come into design and construction from staff, from so those are the ones that come up based on storm damage, any sort of other things that happen that require us to address. So once we score those as a chiefs, and this will be part of the budget process. So the goal of this is that we have these scores sort of after the July board meeting so that we can hear the input of the boards on what they would like to have. So we can put those projects into the list as well. I presume as we go, we'll see how that goes. But it would be post that the chiefs will score. Once the chiefs have scored on the evaluation, which we'll get back to in a sec, I just want to give you the overarching. The AGMs will look at that of those divisions, make sure that give it a double check. They'll go to the GM, and then eventually that'll come to the board, you all as part of the budget process. So again, this is procedures we're developing. Another question.
My question is just, while these ideas or issues are moving through this, do the board members, if they have some questions or concerns, is there some place for them to make a statement somewhere along here? Or we only have an opportunity to say, hey, how about this after it's gone through all these processes?
I believe
Could you understand what I said?
I understood. What I heard is you have a concern about the board members having an input during this process, if I heard you correctly.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if they, well, yes, but I'm asking.
So in terms of that, this is scoring projects before they even become projects. So I would say that at this point, part of this is depending on the scope. I think what we'll do is take a list of the projects that are in front of us and score them and prioritize them. And those that rise to the top, then we will bring to the board of directors in that ward, the board of directors whose ward that is in. And so I guess I'm jumping ahead, but to respond to the question, part of the procedure will be, we have in design and construction have been attempting to get in front of the board and have a briefing with the board member if there's a project or an action in their ward prior to taking that to the action. I think we want to expand on that. And as part of this process, have a one-to-one meeting with all the board members individually with staff at a certain point in the year, maybe once or twice, and then review all the projects that are currently working in your ward. And then also have an opportunity for you to express on that individual basis kind of what your interests are, what is a follow-up, but probably again to maybe that July meeting, we would then schedule individually with board members so that we can hear your concerns and all of those things as we work through this process.
I just want to say, I very much appreciate the fact that we have started to move in that direction where you discuss these specific issues with the board members from that district and give them an opportunity to learn about it and or make comments about it. That wasn't always the case when I first started, but I just wanted to say that sounds great that you just said.
We appreciate that feedback. We feel it's the same, and we would like to expand that so that we can have these one-to-one check-ins at a certain point in the year.
And along with that expansion, has there ever been any thought to, because this is such a big deal and it's getting to be a bigger deal, and we're spending more and more money on these projects, have you ever thought of having a capital improvement committee? Because if you're going to suggest that we're getting better, we're going to talk to one board member of what's going to go on. If you had a committee, you would be talking to 3 board members. I know it's a lot more work, but if we're talking about transparency and including boards and things, that might be one avenue. And I don't know if that committee would meet 4 times a year, quarterly, or once a month, or once a week, or whatever, but it's just a thought.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's something that's come up in discussion here as Director. I'm short. That's come up as we're also looking at the way that internally we're structured around the capital projects, which Ren will talk about the deco piece, but we have projects that are happening in MAST and we have projects happening in finance. So as part of that thinking, kind of thinking about your policy committee as well. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's been something that we've been toying with and might bring to you later this year.
Great, thank you.
Just have a procedural question. So you have all of the chiefs providing their own scoring on all of these different projects, right? Is that?
The goal would be to have this as a meeting and that the chiefs would all do this concurrently together and sort of go through that so that everyone can speak to their purview on that project. And so it would be an effort on the chief's part to meet and then go over these lists concurrently together and score them. So they would go and review these questions. As I understand it, this is how we're proposing it. They would do these questions and score them all together.
Okay, so then you would have a consensus score basically, but with the understanding that it had to be the whole score. Right. Okay, got it. And then that goes to the AGM and the AGMs as a group, and then they don't score themselves. They just do a gut check.
The GM. That's a final check.
And so what happens if well, I guess anything could happen, but if the AGM or the GM disagrees with the scoring, do they have the ability to overturn it or go back for discussion, or how does that work?
Says it on the analysis as of yet. So I think the goal was to try it first and see how it goes. And then, as I said, kind of feedback as we do this more regularly, get this as an annual process. And so see how it goes and then adaptively manage accordingly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And also, these are great questions. So I think we had our first real world experience with this last year, and it was very iterative. I think that they had a lot of robust discussion at the chief and AGM level. And then even once, I think a couple projects came to me and it was on the gut check, it was like, why is that a 35?
All right.
And so, not that it was an overrule situation, but there was a lot of discussion. So it wasn't just kind of, this is it. And then certainly, once it even comes to the board, I mean, you all are ultimately the decision makers on it.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's go back to the criteria and kind of go through these at a sort of higher level and let you know the procedures we've come up with and the questions that we'll be asking in terms of scoring for these all or nothing scores. So first and foremost is an essential project. These will get an NA and are based on legal safety and regulatory requirements. So some of the questions that we look at while discussing these to determine whether they're essential or not is this project mandated by legal action to be in compliance with the regulatory requirement or other legislation? So examples of that are responding to a citation or requirement of the Regional Water Quality Control Review Board. We need to comply with the district's regional general permit or mitigation requirements, or it's identified on the ADA transition plan. So that's one question. Another question is, has the board authorized the park district to accept funding for this project via grant or other outside funding? This is an interesting question because this kind of cuts to the chase of why we're here not why we're here, but a part of the process that we have for prioritizing is that if there are monies from other agencies, they sometimes drive our projects. And so that would be one. If we already have money in hand that we need to deliver on, that's another question. And then lastly, is this project urgent in response to or proactively addressing an emergency or remedy a condition dangerous to public health, welfare, and safety? So as an example, if we answered yes to 2 or 3 of these, it would probably be determined as an NA for a score and it would be considered essential. And so as an essential project, it would ratchet up into priority. Any questions on that one? Okay, so this is kind of if this works, this is how I'm going to go through the next 10. So just share with you the questions. Feel free to interject again if we get there. The next one is the equity criteria, and it's stated here as on the slide. And the questions for this are, does the project meet any of the geographic equity measurements included in CalEPA's disadvantaged communities definition, Plan Bay Area 2050 equal?
Hang on, Ren. I don't know if they have.
No, they don't have them in front of them. So
Wait, did you say it's on a slide?
No, the slide has the criteria in front of it. And so these are the criteria with the score. And what I'm sharing are the procedural questions that we'll ask as a chief level to score these. So these aren't in the policy. These are part of for the procedure. So they're not there. They're not in the packet either. All of the questions are not in the packet. If it's desired, we can give those to we can get those to you.
It's up to the board, but would it be easier to follow if we get those up on the screen? Okay,
That's always the case.
sorry about that.
Visual.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, on that first one there, number one. Is there some quantitative measurement that can be used to apply that in terms of like geographic, using big words here, geographic
Yeah.
proximity to the project in question in terms of those communities that are called out there?
Sure. And yes, and that has, yes, I can speak to
Because
that.
you're
So-
not going to give partial points.
no.
You got to have a real definition there.
That's true. And so geographic equity has been defined as a park or trail where the project will occur is within a half a mile radius of a census tract that meets the Cal EPA's disadvantaged community definition per the Plan Bay Area 2050 Equity Priority Community. So to answer your question, Director Mercurio, there has been an attempt or GIS has taken a stab at this and they've looked at the Plan Bay Area 2050 Equity Priority Community Plan. And so that has a definition for disadvantaged. And also there's been a stab at State Bill 535, which is as a disadvantaged community. So we've scored all of our parks accordingly to that based on this. And so there's a yes, no. And then we actually have, because we're still in process of trying to flesh out the best way to do this, we have a category that is a combination of the two so that we've covered both of those definitions and it's hard to see, but I just pass this around. What I'm showing is it shows a yes for the parks in terms of if they meet that definition. Social equity is a similar.
Grant, if I may,
Yeah.
once again, I'm very confused by this because we've used the word disadvantaged communities and that Cal EPA deals with disadvantaged communities, yet we refer to it as underserved communities. I've never, ever gotten the definition of an underserved community or a disadvantaged community. I'm glad if there is a document that shows that, but we're even using the similar words here. And it is the highest criteria. So I hope we can clear that
Yeah.
at some point.
Director Waspi, Deputy General Manager, Dr. Ana Alvarez, if I may jump in here. Thank you so much for bringing that forward. The best thing that I can say in response to that is that there are multiple definitions, but in essence, we're speaking of the same populations. And so these conversations are being had also at the state level in terms of can they come with a definition that's all inclusive? And the answer has been truly at this moment, the answer is don't get caught up in the definition because the impact and the intention remains the same. For different, there might be small differential characteristics for very specifically aligned intentions or strategic actions when resolving for specific communities based on specific projects. So you cannot treat them all the same. It's on a case by case basis, but for policy documents in general, they are referred to in multiple ways, but in essence, it's all the same. It's marginalized, underserved, economically challenged. It's just a list of definitions. If that helps you.
Yes, thank you. I'd love to see a document that kind of shows me that. And I'm referring specifically, I don't even know if I want to get into it, but I mean, we talk about underserved communities and underserved communities and all these words. And I think, Oakland, Richmond, the things we all think about. And then Ellen and I say Ashland and everybody kind of goes, where the heck is Ashland? And once again, I don't want to get into it right now, but I'll bet if there were some criteria and we could see it, Ashland, Cherryland, and unincorporated Alameda County would be the what's the word? Not a winner, but would be right there. And I don't think it's ever been, because it's not a city. It doesn't get the lobby. It's just this unincorporated, lousy place that's underserved.
Yes, so we're doing the preliminary work in anticipation of our equity officer to come in here. We're examining those issues and we're defining the communities that we can that are adjacent to the lands that we can benefit or that we can protect to prevent for other unintended impacts when doing ecological restorations or doing park planning. So we're looking at creating a profile and understanding where are those marginalized communities within the regional park system, within our jurisdiction, and what is unique characteristics that we might be able to resolve for when we're doing our park planning, when we're doing public access issues, or even ecological restoration issues to prevent for unintended consequences like green gentrification, like the unintended displacement of people that comes from that green gentrification, or intentionally making sure that we're not transferring the climate impact to those local communities by opening access points or doing restoration work in the lands. So it's the beginning of a work that we're doing, and this particular piece will continue to evolve as we continue to do the work.
Go ahead, Member Corbett first.
I would just say it's very important, I think, to keep the board member involved in the discussion or the finding out of this information, because in, I think, all cases, even our new members are very familiar with the district and some of the issues that have happened. You can hire somebody who's an expert on something or other and bring them in to talk to you. But, you know, as board members, we have been involved with some of these projects, knowledgeable about some of the issues that might have something to do with it. You know, just the case of what the needs are in parts of our districts. Some parts of the districts have income issues, et cetera. These are things that we know about because most of us have grown up in our districts as well as serving. And then we were talking about that the other day. So it's important to bring us in too, not ask some expert, what do you think's going on here? And what do you think the needs are? So sorry, I don't mean to be rude about that, but really important to ask for some of the input from board members. We won't know everything, but in some cases, you know, we're familiar with some of the problems going on. So thank you for that.
Cool.
Our policies incorporate Plan Bay Area maps of both geographic and social for programming. And they're quite good and they're quite specific, and all of us can just look at the map and overlap our ward and know what we're talking about. I think we should all have those maps.
And we can get you a copy of that.
Great. Olivia.
I'm curious in terms of the inputs for determining this. Do we use, so I guess it sounds like we're using Plan Bay Area. Is that based on the 2020 census? And the purpose of my question is, how much are we looking at future planning as part of the inputs here? Because I know with housing specifically, right, there's all these housing plans that cities and also unincorporated parts of the county will have to meet. And that may also change some of the different dynamics in each of these geographies.
True. I think in terms of developing our CIP and the prioritization for our projects, I think what we're trying to do is on an annual basis, we'll look at these. And so I think what I'm hearing is that this is an evolving topic. And so that as we do this, we might redefine what those are. The definition may change, or it may become wholly apparent that this is a community that the district wants to serve. And then that can become part of that. I think I'm just thinking out loud here in terms of that. So I think your point is valid. And I think my takeaway from this is that it's our number one issue. It sounds like an issue that's very prevalent for lots of folks in terms of that. I think we have some defining to do, but in fact that we're thinking about this and trying to make our project distribution equitable across all ranges of our constituency is a way forward. To answer your question specifically, I think in terms of planning, like that, those will help inform what projects come in line as we get into that. So as our planning group if we get land and planning says, okay, we're going to open this, then that'll be integrated into that. And that will then inform the capital improvement projects that come out of that plan. So does that?
No, and it works. And I think the Plan Bay Area maps to that point probably should help smooth out some of those inputs in terms of thinking about future growth. I'll just share, because, I previously came from a water supply planning agency and thinking about it. And I was on that board during, the 3 years of severe drought. And when the housing numbers came through, I can share that I had done my own analysis looking at the housing requirements of the Tri-Valley area served by Zone 7, so Dublin, Livermore, Pleasanton. And I actually compared it to Hayward, which is a city that is serviced by San Francisco Public Utilities Commission in terms of their water. And the housing requirements for Pleasanton specifically was a significantly higher percentage than the housing requirements for Hayward. And I was just looking at it from mostly a perspective of water. But in that sense, there is going to be these housing requirements where I know where I live specifically, the Tri-Valley is going to be growing at a faster, larger rate than what's currently a larger city, actually, Hayward.
Understood. Yeah, understood.
Member Eccles?
Pardon me. Good morning. I just wanted to explain what I was handing out to you. So is what I handed out is a draft procedure that staff put together in order to implement the policy. And this is what Ren is speaking about. And this is something that is going to be evolving as necessary over the years as we work to implement the policy that you adopted. So it is something for you to follow along, but I want you to know that this is a procedure that we've used, in last year's budget process and we'll be using in this year, and we'll be refining it as we go. So just wanted to make sure you understood what I handed you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for this. And I certainly understand that there are many definitions out there, as our DGM said, both at the state level and local levels of what is a historically underserved or disadvantaged community or underrepresented community. So I do think it's good to look at more than one. The other thought that I had as I was listening, though, is that there are some parks that may not meet the geographic equity criteria, but are heavily used by underserved populations. Just anecdotally, I'm thinking of Miller Knox that gets a lot of historically underserved communities that come and use that park, especially on weekends. And so I'm just, I know we can only incorporate so much. I mean, maybe that's where the gut check comes in, but I just wanted to also think about the end result of access, whether it's proximity to that park or whether it's a place that where people are already congregating and coming, and there might be improvements to make that space more amenable to the folks that are already there from underrepresented communities.
Yeah, and I'll respond to that. And that gets right to the crux of this, why we have two questions there for equity, because this was a lot of staff discussion last year, where you can take something like Miller Knox is a great example, or Roberts, I think, is another really wonderful example, where it probably won't hit that first geographic equity issue. And this is also why we hate the using just census tracts for our district, right? Because it doesn't really represent who's coming into our district. So that second question there, which is around participants. Now, that's a little fuzzier. We had, I think, a little trouble kind of last year how we would score that, answer that yes or no, which is also why I think you all gave us the direction 2 years ago to start collecting data around our park users, which is really in kind of its beginning phases. And so that will help us address, I think, that trickier question. And, when I talk to cities and try to talk to them about, we're a regional park, we're different from a municipal park. Yes, you have a lot of people that use their neighborhood park, but all over the district, we have people coming from underserved communities into these spaces. So that one is going to be, it's very tricky. And I think that's where the iterative process is going to continue.
Yeah. And thank you. That's helpful. And I did see the social equity question as well. But I just wanted to make sure it wasn't necessarily totally limited to supports regular programming, because, there's programming. So that would definitely hit Roberts. but there may be people doing their own programming or using parks for, just sort of regular activities that may not be regular programming sponsored by us. So that's a harder thing to capture. Yeah. But I think that, the data in terms of figuring out who's actually using the parks would be a big help with all of that.
Great.
Go right in.
Just one quick point also, to that point might also be thinking about transportation networks. And so I'm not sure where that fits in, but in terms of who's using the parks, it might just be, there might be an easier access point because of transportation.
Great. I'm hearing excellent comments on all of this that we will incorporate into our procedure and give feedback as we do this iteratively. And what I've heard is concerns about the definition of underserved and additionally, how we quantify those participants or users that aren't necessarily in close proximity, but that use that park. And to the point of the GM is that we are a regional park district, and part of our draw is getting people from other places to experience new facilities and or places that are within our regional system. And so I think Director San Wong's point about transportation is a value too. So I'm not sure how we'll incorporate that. We're at this point, we're going to use the questions that's laid out in front of you. So with the next, any more comments on that one, I think we'll go to number 2, which is, again, if you want to look at the questions in front of you, they are here. So number 2 is habitat and resource conservation. So the criteria is as stated, and then the questions as they are right there. I believe it's maybe page 3 that you're looking at is, does this project enhance or restore the natural ecosystem and support habitat refugia? Refugia is a fancy word for habitat. I mean, the things that the animal or plant needs to survive in that place. And then will this project protect natural and or cultural resources? So again, these are questions that will be asked in as this chief committee and as a yes, no, and given a total score. I think those are a little more definitive than the equity one. We'll move on to number 3 for enhancing access. Questions are there. Will this project create new points of access for the public to regional parks/trails? Will this project increase operational capacity to serve more users? And will this project improve conditions of existing access to allow for increased or expanded use by the park and or staff? Any comments or questions, concerns on either any of those or additional questions staff should be asking in the scoring? That was number 3 for increasing and enhancing access. Sure.
Do you only need one yes for the score?
That's what I think we were looking at 2 or 3 yeses at a minimum. And that's why there's a justification. And that's why we're going to have this be routed up in terms of, I think, one point is a yes. I'm sorry, I'm new to this process. I wasn't in part of it last year, so I'm learning as we go as well. 1 is a yes. 1 yes is enough for all points. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about the access question and increasing and enhancing access. And I'm wondering if that might be a way, if you incorporated something under equity specifically on that point, that you're increasing access for our historically underserved communities. I think what you've got there now already is a good start on the equity. And this is an excellent question, number 3, but I think there's a crossover question there that maybe that would address the transportation issue and maybe who's already using it or using a park or could use a park. If you specifically asked about, would the park increase access to our underserved communities? And that would be really under the equity question. But this is when I just started thinking about that when I was thinking about this question.
Excellent feedback. Thank you. Okay. We'll go on to criteria 4. Oops, I skipped ahead. So the next one is climate preparedness. Climate preparedness speaks to infrastructure for mitigate and adapt to challenges of changing climate. So the questions we ask are, will this project mitigate climate impacts through reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, such as active transportation alternatives? So our regional trails, for instance, improve waste management or energy efficiencies, or increase greenhouse gas sequestration through improved habitat. The next question is, will this project adapt to climate threats through natural infrastructure enhancements for sea level rise, wildfire resilience, and or flood protection? So this gets to any sort of shoreline project if it has like a horizontal levee, or if we're doing work that would increase fire breaks and or things of that nature.
Member Sandwell.
I just want to make my point that we don't just have flood protection requirements along the shoreline. Certainly within some of the interior parts of the park district, there's also flood management concerns.
Most definitely. Yes, a lot of our regional trails are along flood control channels. And so, yes, that would be part of it. Thank you for noting that. Any other questions on climate preparedness? Again, these are the questions that we'll ask procedurally to acknowledge and score based on the criteria that are in your in the policy that you've adopted. So partnerships, this gets to partnerships with.
Hang on.
Oh,
Did you just have a? You're waiting for the next one. I'm interested in the prior one that we just left.
okay, let's go back to climate preparedness.
Just a point of clarification here. So on the questions for evaluation, it talks about active transportation. So does that mean that if it's you could probably reasonably expect that a paved regional trail would kind of automatically achieve those points?
Yes, I would say that
Yeah.
would be a safe set.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's good.
So the questions for partnership are, is this project being advanced in partnership with a community-based organization and or government/agency partner? Have regular and ongoing communication occur with community members on this project by the park district? And does this project include external funding greater than 30% of the total project cost? So that gets into our grant funding, and if we have more grant funding that we need to deliver the project on. And a partnership is defined as a legal or formal collaboration between the East Bay Regional Park District and an external organization with shared and specified responsibilities. An example of this is the Doolittle Trail project we're working on right now, is the San Francisco Bay Trail connector or gap closure. We've worked with Caltrans a lot because we were in their right of way. And so that is a partnership that we established because of that project. Director Rosario.
Do you have an example of where we've engaged the community in a project?
We don't have that we have engaged the community, like for the Tidewater expansion. We engaged with the community. We reached out to several community organizations in the development of that plan. And so that was part of the process. And we are endeavoring to engage with the community for lots of our projects at this point in time, be it either through CEQA and or planned project development as we get into that. But I think this is reaching more towards something that's not necessarily that outreach, but something that's established prior to, and something that we're trying to mutual goals for that agency. I think that's the intent of this question.
Yeah, I asked because I'm kind of curious how we can engage a small community in a project. Because I just want to thank the fire department and myself. We helped the Friends of Walking Miller Park apply for a grant, a wildfire grant, and I just wanted to know how we can incorporate some of those into our approvals for our projects.
This is Lisa Gorgon, Assistant General Manager of Operations. Thank you, Director Rosario. I think what you're getting at and what this question specifically was trying to do was to add community-based organization partnerships at the same level to really bring them up to to the same level as other granting agencies or others. So I'm not answering your question about how we can engage. I'm just saying that's the point of this question, is to put them on a more equal footing so that they are considered to be able to get those points.
Yeah.
So that's the thought behind that. So, and I'll defer to Ren about the other question, but.
Thank you. That helps.
In terms of engagement, I think we're learning as we go. We're finding the community groups that are out there, like East Oakland Collaborative was one we worked with at Tidewater. So in terms of just getting and establishing those relationships, I think is important. I think I don't know how best we will do that as an agency. I think it will require other divisions and departments besides design and construction. So I think public affairs. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say this is perfectly tees us up for what we're going to be bringing you around your new master plan, which we've started internally the work already around that, of putting what we think we call the plan for the plan. And a big part of that is how we do true community engagement as part of that. So much more to come and later this year.
Again, I'm looking at this whole policy and these questions as the steps towards a greater goal. We have lots of things to figure out, but I think from my point of view, we're learning, and this is super helpful for us as well. So thank you for all your comments. Moving on to number 6, operating efficiencies. Has this project received a significant number of work orders? And significant number of work orders will define as higher than average as quantified in the Park District's work order database. So over the last 12 months than other ones. So will this project result in operational efficiency, save staff time? So this would be like a service yard where they're either trucking things around, that we build a service yard where they can keep equipment, things of that nature. And then will this project result in revenue generating outcome? Robert's Pool is one that comes to mind. Any questions on those questions or comments?
Could you use the pool as an example of what you're referring to make sure they're.
Sure. So will this project result in a revenue generating outcome? That pool receives revenue, I believe, and that generates revenue. And so if it does create revenue for the district, that when they go back into our general fund, I think that gets scores as a 1 or a yes. And so any project that would then do that and create revenue generating, then I think that it qualifies and it increases operating efficiency. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Sure. Any other comments on that? Okay, moving on to number 7, public and environmental health. I'm just going to keep reading these out loud unless you guys object. So we'll ask the questions. Does this project increase built infrastructure resistance to natural disasters such as smoke days, wildfire, earthquake, or other? Will this project improve water quality and or mitigate the ongoing use of chemicals at the project site? And lastly, does this project include public safety infrastructure improvements such as expanded access roads, swim lesson capacity, or safe drinking water? So I think, for instance, the Dotson Family Marsh could answer yes to the first 2 in terms of providing both a big marsh that would accept our capacity for flooding or inundation. And then it also, because of that marsh, it improves water quality because we have a marsh out there that then filters water and creates a ecosystem that is doing what it needs to do in terms of environmental health and cleanliness, which was not there prior.
Sorry, I'm going backwards here. I'm still stuck on the last question in operating efficiencies because I like that a project, especially Robert's Pool, could generate money eventually, but I also feel like you can't really ask that question in isolation of the amount of money that you're investing in it. And certainly I say for Robert's Pool, you do it. And so I'm not saying we shouldn't do it because we're not doing it to generate money. We're a park district. But at the same time, I don't know that you could really say that it's improving operating efficiencies by generating revenue. So that's where I'm sort of like, I don't know if we should really, I'm just raising this as a question. I don't know if we should be asking that question in complete isolation of the amount of money that we're actually investing in something.
I hear that question, and my interpretation of this one is that so if something's revenue generating, then I think part of the operating efficiency is that it's creating its own revenue to run it. So Roberts has probably a larger, speculating here as I'm not in operations, but a larger operational cost. And so the efficiency is that then it's generating its own funding. I mean,
But I don't know if it'll ever pay off the amount of money that you're actually investing in.
No, and it's the nature of a capital improvement project is that it devalues for the life of it. So we never really get our return on investment wholly for any of these projects. It's to your point is that we're a park district and we're providing these facilities. So again, I might be stepping out of my bounds on finance, but I think that's kind of the rationale behind it.
Just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we should get our money back because we are a park district. I'm just wondering about, calling the money that's generated from something like a project like Roberts, describing that as an operating efficiency given the amount that we're investing. I'm not sure that that's really accurate, I guess, I'm just wondering if we should be considering that in a broader context of what we're actually investing.
Fair enough. I hear that. As we score these, we'll look at the project that score yes or no on those and sort of then come to, I think in doing this, we'll have a better idea of how it plays out and sort of if that question is valid or not, I think is kind of what I'm approaching this as is that we will look at that and with your comment noted that I think it's a valid comment and we can look at that and assess this as to whether it should stay or not.
I agree with Director Eccles that because there's a lot of projects where facilities like what we're proposing for the EEC or what we just completed Doolittle. I mean, they generate no revenue, but at the same time, it's definitely a benefit. So, I agree. I think maybe we should be looking at the budget thing as the question is maybe minimizing that, or at least look at it with that jaundiced view. All right.
Fair enough. I think I'll reiterate. I mean, this is about operating budget impacts. So if we look at the criteria itself, it talks about having a positive impact on the operating budget, such as through significant savings in time, materials, and maintenance by resulting in a revenue generating outcome. So I think your points are valid. I'm not discounting those. I think they're captured in other criteria in the policy is what I would sort of speculate. And as we've seen from the crossover with access and equity, it's kind of some of these are cross-pollinated and we're trying to get at least something to define it. Again, this is ongoing and your comments are greatly appreciated. Yeah.
So unless our world changes drastically, it's much easier to get capital money than it is operating money. I mean, I think everybody agrees upon that. And so I a lot of times I'll look at a project just as a citizen, I'll say, well, the way it's set up now, it's really expensive to operate this thing, for a lot of reasons, uses too much water, uses too much power, everything corrodes. And so we have to replace it. Now we're going to build something with stainless steel and it's going to have, LEDs and all this stuff. So when you have an opportunity to build a new facility that costs less to operate, I think that's something that's worth rewarding with points. You got to spend money to save money sometimes. And I'm always an advocate of that. So just another way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think that's covered by the second question. I think, yeah. I would agree with that, what you just said. So we can jump in.
I wasn't going to say anything, but then after this conversation, thinking about the revenue generating comment, for some reason, my mind goes to cell phone towers. Do we have cell phone towers where we generate revenue on Park District land? I'm assuming we do. I just actually don't know about it personally. But is that something that might be included here?
No, the ones that are existing were there, as I understand it, when we got the property, and so those are remaining. But it's the park district's intent to not put any more cell towers out there for any revenue is my understanding.
Okay, so we don't get revenue from self. Okay, thanks.
We do currently, but we're not looking. See, we're not looking to increase cell phone towers on the park property. That's a given. That's the current policy for Park District, and it's certainly one I would support personally.
Yes, I've been told that with the exception of the ones that we have our own communication, like so the tower, then public safety headquarters, and we'll be installing one across the street as necessary for that. So. Okay, I think we touched on public and environmental health, so we'll skip to number 8. We're in the home stretch now of this portion of the discussion. Multi-beneficial use. Does this project maximize co-benefits, including recreational access, habitat protection, environmental education, grazing opportunities, or other needs? And does this project take multiple infrastructure needs into consideration to streamline project implementation at the park/trail? And hearing none, I will move on to number 9. Maintains, extends useful life and services. Will this project improve, renovate, and repair built infrastructure to extend the life of a facility and or improve park/trail services for the next 10 years? And will this project improve an existing facility with a facility condition index assessment of poor, failed, or at risk? That second question addresses the BFA report that we have that has rated a lot of our facilities in terms of their condition index. That's been done by Finance and Management Services, and they went and looked at all of the conditions of our buildings, roofs, all of those things. So that's what that question refers to. Okay, last one, project readiness. The questions for evaluation in this one are, is the project identified in the Park District's master plan? Is the project identified in an adopted planning or environmental assessment document? And lastly, is the project identified within a voter commitment list? For example, Measure WW, Measure AA, Measure CC, or Measure FF?
And on this one, I just want to note the points. And just to triple down on this, that, so it does receive points if it's in there, but it is less points than the other criteria. And that's, again, to get to this, not allowing the funding to necessarily drive the prioritization, but rather hopefully the other way around. It's going to take us a little while, but at least starting us down that road.
We're going to talk about that though, aren't we? Because they're one of the 3 questions you folks teed up was, are you comfortable with the prioritization? And I guess that's with the point.
Yep.
Because that one is kind of sticks out for me.
Go ahead.
Maybe I can go last, but I wanted to go back to 3 because I have a question.
Go back to which one? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Number 3.
Thank you.
Yeah, my mic's on. Number 3.
Sure.
But are you guys talking about what we're talking about right
I have a more holistic question, so go ahead.
Okay. So back on number 3, just asking the questions that we need to ask to find out. How do we determine? I'll just tell you about this issue. There's a park in my district along the shoreline, and it is also along the freeway. And so my question is, are we asking enough questions to determine whether this park really can be usable at the level we'd like to see it used? It's not a place you can just walk over to the park. There's no bus to take to get there. You wouldn't necessarily, some people might, but some people might not just get on their bike in their neighborhood and go over to this park district. So I just don't know if the questions are enough here to determine those kinds of issues. The access to a particular, and this probably doesn't happen everywhere, but the access to this park and how people can get to it. We have plenty of people that go there and borrow that property to put in their programs with the, I'm forgetting the name of the type of boats. And they're there and their families and they got cars and all kinds of ways to get in there. But if it's just the park for that community and that neighborhood, the neighborhoods that are nearest that we would be interested in making sure people have a chance to use this park are across the freeway. And there's not really any access transportation to get to this park. So, maybe it's nice for people who have big cars and groups to get there, but for the neighborhoods that are closest, that really would benefit from using this park, how do we, I don't know if those questions are really asked.
I hear what you're, Director Corbett, I hear your question saying is how do these questions address getting access to that park? And I think these questions are more about scoring, prioritizing projects that are already in the queue and not necessarily addressing how do we solve the problems for this park necessarily. So for instance, if there was a project at the park you're describing and it provided a regional trail connection, then we would score yes to this to say that it is increasing access. But I think the prioritization policy doesn't necessarily speak to the issues of access.
Well, that's my issue that I don't know if we're really addressing how we establish access to this park by nearby communities, right? That are just across the freeway. But how do you get there? Unless there's somebody coming in from, Piedmont or your club you belong to. Do you know what I mean? So I just don't know if this answer addresses those kinds of that issue.
Okay.
We belong somewhere else, but it's something we should deal with.
Noted. I think we can, again, as we do score this, we'll look at additional questions that may come up in terms of how to address access issues.
Yeah, I think there are two separate points here. And one is, how do you increase access to a park in general? And then also, how do you increase access to underserved communities that may be just right on the other side of that freeway? And I think that's a broader thing that we need to look at. And that's also why I think it makes sense to put a question like this in the equity part. So that in that first question set of questions for equity, because I think yes, that's if we can provide a pedestrian bicycle bridge over the freeway, or if we can provide transportation, or if there's some other way of getting people who are just in this case right on the other side of the freeway, to get access to that beautiful shoreline park. That's really, really important. And I think that's these are, as you said, these are for criteria for projects that are already in the pipeline. So we have to even take a step back further and say, okay, well, how are we addressing this issue, more generally to get those projects into the pipeline? But once they are in the pipeline, I think they should be the projects that can increase access should be included. And I think it's probably in the equity, under the equity question, but maybe there's something that should be under number 3 as well. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, just it's not a question, but it's your question about access. The last event I went to with the Bicycle Trail Council, there was a mention of Bay Area Air Quality was giving a grant for design of a bike ped crossing at 66th Avenue into Martin Luther King. So it would be directly from BART to 66, or at 66th into Martin Luther King. So that would be huge if it happens. And then the other thing is our collaboration with Alameda County Flood Control, extending San Andrew Creek Trail from Hagenberger to, from Hagenberger to 98th is also a huge benefit to the neighborhood, because the neighborhood can have an extended access to San Andrew Creek and Arrowhead Marsh. So those are things that are, you and I are working. So yeah.
Okay.
That just triggered for me one thing I did want to say too, which is just in the bigger context, these other agencies, granting agencies, funders, and then also other, public agencies are also now moving towards using criteria as they're ranking projects and deciding which ones to either fund or move forward. So I'm glad you mentioned both those projects because they involved a lot of different other agencies who are going to be applying and already are applying, certainly on the equity questions, a lot of prioritization. So.
And then I also just had sort of a global question or comment. I know you said at the beginning that these criteria are all or nothing because you felt that was more objective. But I guess I'd like to understand better why it's more objective, because when I look through these questions, like if somebody can just qualify based on one of these questions, I'm not sure that I'm not sure we are getting to the best ranking at the end of the day. It might not be a question.
No,
a broader question for the group, but yeah.
I hear your question.
I know Lisa was one of our leads in putting this together. So in her last role.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we and actually Matt's here. He participated, Ren participated. So we ran through the several iterations of this last year before we brought it to you as part of the work session. And we found it was very difficult to score by giving half points. I mean, to implement and actually have it be effective. It became very inconclusive. It was operationally very hard to implement by giving half points or how many points then. And so I think it's helpful to hear these comments. Last year was the first year we brought this to you, and we've learned a lot. And so just hearing this comment today, it's definitely something that I think, Ren and ASD can look at to maybe there are some of the questions where you can get partial points. I think this is iterative, but just sort of as we ran through it, it became very hard to implement sort of with various levels of points. And so that's why we have multiple questions to try to get away from giving partial point. It was sort of, that was a way that we tried to address it. So I can see you have concerns about that, but that was sort of the thought.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that was also the feedback that you got from other agencies that had been using similar processes for years.
Yeah. And so, certainly there's some communities within the Bay Area that use this, but these prioritization criteria, last year when we went through, we really looked at precedent from many other regional park agencies, city park agencies, and county park agencies that use this prioritization criteria. And that was the feedback we heard from them it was all or nothing, and not just asking one question, but really trying to ask several questions to see, to give the opportunity for these different projects to receive points.
So just so I'm clear, so the other agencies, they also had a series of questions, but then you didn't get points by each question. You got the full amount of points for the category by answering yes to any one of the questions.
That's right.
Okay. Because I've definitely seen it done differently. That doesn't mean it's better. I mean, if this is you guys are closest to this. So if you think that's how it best works, I certainly accept that. I just like looking at the questions, it felt like, man, if you just qualified on one, then you get the whole points, where there could be another project that qualifies on many of the questions. I wasn't sure if that would lead you to the best result.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why, as part of, as Ren described, there's sort of multiple iterations. So the folks who are looking at it at the chief level, recommending it to the AGMs, then reviewing it with the GM, and then it ultimately comes to the board. So, there's room for adjust, I think, at all those stages. And, I'll just just, state the obvious. It is a prioritization criteria and, everything becomes a priority, which then means nothing's a priority. So that's really what this tool is, I think, trying to help with.
Anyone else? Before we move to the next section? I've been around too long and I'm getting too old. I've been in the mountains for the last couple of days. I just wish this is all great. I envisioned John Muir stumbling into Yosemite going, let me see here. And in all seriousness, and then I can even envision Bob Walker flying over Round Valley. And you've heard that story, right? That this hidden potential dump, and Bob Walker took photos of it and publicized it and said, this is crazy. This has beauty. This has inspiration. This is healthful. There's an awe factor. And I guess it's part of it. But I mean, when I look at some of these deals, there are some parks here that wouldn't make the grade. Round Valley, Morgan Territory, Vasco Caves, lots of stuff. I hope we can continue the beautiful, we're preserving beautiful places. That's just an editorial comment. Anyway, so and also can I get a time check from Ken or somebody? Are we on time? Are we on schedule?
We're fine.
11:22.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
We can.
Anyone else on this topic? And go ahead, Libby.
So in terms of our schedule, so we're going through the criteria today. And are we going to then talk about these questions that are in the memo next, or what's the next steps?
For the prioritization?
Yes.
So we've heard comments from the board today. The intent was that we would then take this and take a first stab at, as shown here, scoring new projects that haven't been scored. The project budget book already has scores that were done. So the projects that have come in the last year, we'll aggregate and score and sort of add them to the queue of the projects that are already existing.
And so then the next time we'll look at this will be in July when we review the projects, or is there another step in between now and then?
No, so in terms of the actual proposed projects as part of your budget, I'm looking at Deborah on the timing, but that typically comes in the fall. Yeah. That's when after you guys run all of this through the black box. Yeah.
October, November. Okay, so what's happening in July again?
Sorry. So July is an opportunity for the board to provide your priorities and your projects and your issues, can also be programming, just to help inform the budget process and the recommendations that we'll be bringing to you.
So then I think between now and July, and maybe this might be more of an individual thing for me, it'd be helpful to maybe look at running a few of the projects through this criteria and just kind of seeing what those scores are. And then also, after having this conversation today, I have some ideas about some of the modifications, again, thinking about some of the future housing projects that are coming into place. So for example, I know I'm thinking a lot about the GARMS project specifically, but there's a lot of housing that's actually being proposed near there that might not even make it into this criteria. I know Dublin just approved 300 affordable housing units right next to the BART station there. And then the Stone Ridge Mall site is being slated for additional housing. And I don't think any of that gets captured right now in our current scoring. And I don't know if it should, but it's just a point to consider in regards to this.
And to your question around the projects, we'll make sure that I think in your orientation binder, we included the project scores, Deborah. Sorry, they I don't know if we provided the new directors a copy of the project book with the scores that were attached, but
Okay.
yeah. And they did run through all the projects with the scores.
Yeah, I'll look at the materials I have.
Yeah. The point GM is making is we did that. We ran through a number of projects as examples of how they would score. I think it was last September. Something. And it was
We gave it.
or Director Lane and I looking at the scoring of the Black Diamond Timber project and starting to pull our hair out because it didn't, right? It was a great exercise. And to your point, it's a very good exercise. I'd actually like to see us do it with the land acquisition criteria. To get back to your point, is if you run specific potential land acquisitions through a different set of criteria that we just looked at last work session for land acquisitions, how is that going to work? How is property near Round Valley going to compare to property out on Point San Pablo? And it will be very different and give you a good feel for that. So I'd like to run through land acquisition criteria at some future.
And we will do that, Director Coffey. Just noting that. Thank you.
Just because of what you were saying.
I'll review the materials that I have, but I may then request some extra time. Okay. Thank you.
It's a great segue, actually. Talk about district projects 5-year CIP and our budget book. So as was stated, our project budget book is volume 2 of our annual budget. In this project budget book, there are currently 98 projects that are listed in as projects unto themselves and not including the projects that are listed under active programs. So we already have an outstanding list of projects. As shown here, they do have a CPP score or criteria prioritization policy score. So the McCosker one, for instance, has a score of 115. You'll also see on the bottom here of this Sibley Volcanic Regional Preserve page, there is a 5-year expenditure plan. This has kind of been the district's attempt at how we're going to spend funds over the next 5 years. This is not a CIP. I think a CIP is a refinement or as an amendment to this document. It would then take that list of 98, we'll score them, and then we'll have a refined list of projects that then the district can pursue funding for. And it gives us a document that's a little more precise and honed in on what projects we're actually delivering, as opposed to this blanket big statement of the projects that are there. So a 5-year CIP, just to clarify in terms of what it is, that's not part of this project budget, is it coordinates the physical improvements with financial planning, allowing max benefits from available funding sources. So that's the goal, is that by having a 5-year CIP and utilizing sort of the projects that we have, the projects that are incoming, as I mentioned earlier, we get lots of requests almost weekly, monthly for new projects. Those will be incorporated and scored, and we will then, so part of it is we'll prioritize it. Projects that score high will then be included as part of this. And then the board's action in formalization of this prioritization will be the adoption of this budget and potentially a 5-year CIP, such that we'll discuss with you the scoring, how it gets to that point, figure out what we're going to allocate in the next year for funding for that project. And then as the adoption of the budget, the board then says, we agree with this prioritization that staff has suggested through that process. So that's ultimately our goal in doing all of these things. We have been successful as an agency in delivering capital improvement projects, and that has not been a problem. We're just trying to refine this so that we have a clear understanding for staff, for our constituents, and for you, the board, of what projects we're working on. So it's hard to verify all of that from that big list in the project budget book. These are the 23 projects that are highlighted in the project budget book this year. This is not our current workload. I will get into our workload next. So I'll get into that soon. Are there any questions about just to circle back, the prioritization was taken as a first stab, to reiterate, after the September from the last budget process. So we took a stab at scoring those. What I've suggested today in terms of procedure is kind of a refinement of what happened last year. And we're going to take it another step forward, trying to see if we can then take those scores and come up with a 5-year CIP. So any questions or comments along that before I get into our current workload and design and construction and what we do here? Do we need a break? Proceeding. So here is a map. This was included in the packet. This is our design and construction's work plan. It's broken down into phases. So this is based on our first quarter work plan of 2023. So the colors denote the phase that they're in. So it's either in construction, in design and permitting, or in preliminary design. We also have some projects on our work plan that are initial scoping. We also help with other design services, and then we have closeout. But these are the active projects. There are currently 60 on that map, as you see. So we're about covering two thirds of the project in the project budget book. As accomplishments last year, we completed 8 projects with a value of over $10 million. So we completed those last year, and we are continuing on 12 more projects that we started last year in construction into 2023. And those are all part of the 60 projects that we're working on. So that's a lot of work. You might ask, who is doing all that work? That is the design and construction takes the major lead in delivering capital improvement projects. The district is judicious in it. We have so many projects that other entities in the district besides design and construction take projects on, but design and construction takes a lot of the brunt of it. So design and construction is broken into 5 groups, consisting of 30 professional staff. Those groups consist of the administrative staff, which is the chief of design, and then the admin analyst 1 that they manage the program, but basically in terms of communicating, like I'm doing as acting chief right now, communicating our work plan to the board and other entities, and helping to specify what the work plan and workload is. We'll go left to right on this graph. Our surveying and construction inspection unit, it consists of surveyors and construction inspectors. They also have an admin analyst 1 who is instrumental in processing all of the invoices that come in on all of our construction projects. I will note that the org chart in front of you is a little outdated. We have subsequently filled the supervising land surveyor position. And so Will Rose, who is noted on here as field officer surveyor, has been promoted to supervising land surveyor, and his position is currently vacant. So that is one addendum to this. And I think that is the one major change. But what our survey group does is they provide topographic surveys for our projects. In terms of initial plans, we need to have topographic surveys. They will do those as necessary. They also help with land disputes. They help our legal department significantly with boundary surveys and going out and test and doing, like, a tree falls down and the neighbor says, that's your tree. And then we say, it's your tree. They go out and to figure out whose tree it is. So that's an important part of our work and as an agency. And so they support us for construction surveys. Our inspectors, we have 4 inspectors. 1 is actually a vacancy currently. What our inspectors do are they are our QA QC for our projects. This gets into scale and scope of our projects. Over the past few years, we've increased our project delivery. So in terms of not only the number, but the size of the projects as well. Historically, our construction inspectors were out on site. They would run our weekly construction meetings. They would be there to verify that the plans and specifications are being adhered to. Basically the eyes and ears for our design and construction team while a project is being constructed. 4 inspectors for 20 some projects is as by the last is not quite enough for them to be there all the time. And so some of our projects, we've started to hire construction management firms to help facilitate some of the projects that we deliver. And that is consistent across all of these units. So moving over to the design unit is civil engineers and landscape architects. Their primary drive is to do internal design. So they'll develop the design and the engineering for a lot of projects that are maybe smaller staging areas that we know we're doing how and what we need to do out there for scope. And so that is primarily their charge. That said, we're getting into more complex projects. And so they will sometimes have to hire consultants to help administer. The other thing that the design unit does is develop our district standards, which are on our website. And so we have quarterly meetings of our standard details and specifications. So the design unit works on those. Additionally, the design unit is our main point of contact with stewardship for our TCP projects. If you're not familiar, TCP stands for Trails, Creeks, and Ponds. It's covered by our construction in general, or it's covered by our regulatory permit that allows us to do maintenance on bodies of water. So trails, creeks, and ponds, hence the name. Typically, we need to have environmental regulatory approval to touch any body of water. That is quite an onerous process for individual projects. I'll touch on that a little bit more as we talk about process delivery in it shortly. But this regional permit allows us to do maintenance. And so part of that, though, and what we found is that the regulatory agencies are becoming a little more, they want more detail. So our design team goes out and looks at some of these projects like culverts that have washed out to assess what exactly that is. And that actually is one of the drivers for new projects as well. If the TCP project is too large for our roads and trails crew to do, they say, DECA will cover this and they'll engineer it and do it. And so this is one of the ways projects get added to the queue, but our design team is the primary point to help with the engineering requirements for those regional permits. The project management unit was created about 7 years ago in a reorg that then the thought was because we have so many projects and they are becoming more complex, the project management unit would leverage staff to hire consultants to help develop plans for these projects. And then that way the district could deliver larger and more complex projects than it historically has. The project management unit is landscape architects, project manager, project coordinator, and the district architect. Again, that was the intent. And we found that sometimes because design is busy with TCP, the project management unit will do some smaller in-house design as well. And this all feeds into having project managers that have a wide breadth of projects so that when one project is in review or on hold, they can pick up another project and keep that moving forward so that, they're constantly working and delivering projects in stages that maybe require review. The last unit in our group is the environmental programs unit. This was added to design and construct. This unit was added to design and construction in 2020 as part of another reorg. I'm sure you're all familiar with Chris Barton and his larger projects, like mentioned earlier with the Dotson Family Marsh. Is also part of the Albany Beach project. So this group, as its name implies, is more into the restoration projects. And so that staff has done, Chris was kind of in his own realm for a little while. And so we incorporated him into design and construction because it made sense in terms of the projects he's delivering and the method by which he does it. So that then design and construction is again doing all of these capital improvement projects. They're all phenomenal staff, by the way. I'll just editorialize that I love working with all of them and they're super committed individuals.
And they're leading a field trip, I think, as we speak.
So yes, the McOsker tour is part of the Together Bay Area. And so that you got a preview to what they will be enjoying here in the next couple hours. Yes. Yes. We're mostly on the third floor on that corner of the building. Come by and visit. So yes, we're all here on our appropriately scheduled days. But it is a great staff of committed individuals that take a lot of challenges. And they do what they need to do. So here are the this is a graphic that's been shared before. This highlights the board touch points for our process. This ties back to the phases of a project. Again, these colors are coordinated to the map that shows where all the projects are. So I'll walk you through some of these. I'll walk you through these phases and give examples of what work we do in the next few slides. But this slide highlights when we come to the board and when we seek board action. So this is, again, as a full board and or a committee, this doesn't touch on the point of what I said earlier in terms of trying to reach out and talk to board members on an individual basis. These are committee and or full board actions. So preliminarily, when preliminary design, so we come to you for when we enter into an initial design contract if needed for a consultant. Preliminary design will, sorry, I'm just debating right now if I should just skip ahead and then talk about the phases as phases, and then you can come back. So take this in. I think this is in your packet if you want to look at it as we go, so that I don't have to stay on the slide and I can discuss the phases appropriately. So The first is preliminary design. We were just out at McCosker Creek project, restoration of that in Sibley last week. So the preliminary design in that was actually incorporated as part of the land use plan amendment, which is typically not what we do. We usually do the land use plan amendment and then would have some preliminary design, but this one was the difference. But what that entails is in preliminary design, what we do is we go to do site analysis, which entails cultural and natural resource inventories. We do geotech studies. We do hazmat studies. We will do notes, all kinds of site analysis. This is when we'll get our surveyors out there to do a topographic survey so that we know where the grades are. So when we have to make either universal access or do a lot of earth moving, we know those quantities for our construction documents. This is when we will develop a conceptual design. And sometimes the development of the conceptual design occurs in-house, and sometimes it will happen with a consultant contract. So that first touch point on that schedule is we may come to the board to hire a consultant to help us with the conceptual design. And part of that is then looking at the site, looking at the inventory and analysis has been done, and coming up with 1, 2, potentially 3 options of what are best solutions for that, given the constraints of the site. So, and we've done it multiple ways. Like I said, we've hired a consultant that's helped us with that. And part of that conceptual design will include public outreach, depending on if it's included or not as part of the CEQA. So for the McCosker project, for instance, all of our public outreach was part of the CEQA land use plan process. For our Tidewater project, it wasn't. We did that separately as part of the concept plan. We had public outreach meetings so that the public was involved in contributing to that. So back to that, the conceptual design, if it's smaller, we do that in-house. And then if it's in the project management unit, they would hire a consultant to then develop that. And the reason we do that internally is that we have found that our staff is best suited to coordinate and meet with, I guess I did miss one thing, is that we do come up with a project team that incorporates all other aspects and all other departments. So for instance, our project team will include somebody from fire, somebody from police, somebody from ops. We'll get Katie Hornbeck and grants involved so she can start looking for money. So our project team captures somebody from every division in the district so that we can have full input to know what operationally we need to take care of. And that all happens at the first blush of that happens at this preliminary phase so that we can understand basically what we need to do to operate it correctly and how it best will serve the community, and then how to get funding. So as part of that concept design, we will engage with staff to sort of come to a best scenario in terms of what we think is best. And then we'll bring that conceptual design to, historically, what we've done is bring it to the exec committee for review and sign off before we proceed into the next phase, which is project delivery. Which is design, development, and permitting. So once we have a conceptual design that's agreed upon, and again, it ranges depending on the scale and the scope, we will take that. And this is potentially another touch point, is that if we had a concept plan and then we need to hire a consultant on that, we would come to the board. Sometimes as part of a hiring consultant, we do an RFP process that captures full scope, and we might enter into it only into concept plan. And then knowing that once we get approval of that, we will amend a contract. And that's when we would come back to the board to amend that to develop into contract documents. Contract documents are the technical plans and specifications that are used to go out to public bid. We do that as a development, as the development is an apropos name because we do it at 35, 65, and 95%. And that includes cost estimates as well. I forgot to mention that in the concept plan. We do a cost estimate then at the very beginning to get a rough order of magnitude of what those costs would be. And as we develop plans and get more details, those cost estimates become more refined because we have the details, we have our impacts. Those become better as we get closer to bidding. Again, as we do this, we have our project team look at these at 35, 65, and 95%. Those are kind of industry standards, if you will. The engineering and architecture will follow that in terms of development. So we are staying up with industry standards. I will note here also that our specifications procedurally, or as a process, we have taken on in design and construction, the reformatting of our technical specifications into CSI format, which is probably a little technical, but it's Construction Specifications Institute. And the reason we did that is that that's an industry standard. And so we thought in terms of putting our projects out to bid, it would be helpful for our contractors to look at specifications that they're used to. So we used to have our own kind of one-off technical specs, and the technical specs are how and specifically what you have to do. So it's a written document that accompanies our plans. So we have plans that show things like these details in front of you, but then we'll have a specification book that says concrete, you have to use this amount. It has to have this amount of secure time. Well, these are the tests you have to do. So those are the specifications, and all of those create our contract documents, which I was about to skip to, but I thought the touch point for the board here is sometimes with larger projects, McCosker being the case, we will hire a construction management service. And again, this was a large project that had many environmental permitting requirements that needed to be monitored on a daily basis. So if you reflect back to our org chart, we have 3 construction inspectors to cover 20 projects. That's why we need to hire some of the construction managers to help us with these large projects. Because on McCosker, we need somebody there on a daily basis to be there every day to make sure that what our contract documents, i.e. our plans and specs state, are happening. I can get into the level of complexity. I mean, a complex project comes about for many reasons. It includes permitting. It includes partner agencies where we have land tenure or where we have easements. So these things all need to be looked into. So they increase the complexity and therefore require sometimes our CM services. And we bring on a CM for them to do a double check of our contract documents. Engineers are great at it, but when we bring on the CM firm, we hope that they can look at it from a construction point of view and then refine documents so that when we could put it out to bid, that they've addressed constructability and biddability issues. So in other words, making sure there's quantities that are easy for a contractor to take off, making sure that some of the details are per standard in terms of construction practices. So that gets us to award of construction. Once we have those set, we take it out to public bid. We are design bid build for most of our delivery, and what that means is we have plans and specs we put out to bid, we advertise them. This is all per public contracting code. And then we take the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, which is what it is. That's how it goes. So sometimes we will get contractors that will underbid others that may not have experience that we would necessarily want. And that's another reason why construction administration and management is very crucial, because they may not have, even though they gave us the lowest bid and we deemed it responsive and responsible, they may not have the skill set that we require. We have taken a stab at some pre-qualifications for contractors. They haven't been super successful. That doesn't mean we're not going to continue to try to do that. So it is something we're working on in terms of our delivery, is how we can do a good pre-qualification process that gets us contractors within the framework of public contracting code. So that said, once we put it out to bid and receive that, that's when we'll come back to the board for authorization of that construction contract. And then we get into construction, which is the main, it's where we get the rubber meets the road, if I may, because when you're doing plans, there's always, you can postpone. Oh, we had to get a permit. We don't have that. When we're in contract, that's when we have to make some decisions. We have to make them fairly quickly as we can. And we've also find that that's when we find things that we did not know were out there. So unforeseen conditions happen once we get into the ground. The other things that may come up, the district as an agency, we are a wild winter. We found that rain days happen. And so not only do they cause delays in construction, but they wreak havoc on our lands and they create more projects that we need to take on and repair. So construction is fun. We like it. It's the challenge. So to that, we do. But that said, we have working days in our contract documents as to our best. We have an estimate, an engineer's estimate when we go out to bid that's comparative to what the bids we get back. All that said is that we do have change orders. I've not worked on one project here where we don't have change orders. And so part of the process of that is documenting what the change was from our contract documents, why it's necessary, the back and forth of we get an estimate. We have an estimate of what this change may be. The contractor comes back, we negotiate those terms, making sure that everyone's scope is in agreement. And so then that's how we codify a change order, which then becomes part of the contract via change order. It's just part of business. I wish we didn't have change orders, but we do find lots of conditions change as we get into it. And then when we get to the end, which is kind of where we were last week, this is a good photo. That bottom photo shows the orange fencing in the background is called URTEC fencing. And it is one of the requirements of it's a wildlife exclusion fence. So any project where we have environmental permits, we typically sometimes have that type of fencing all the way around the project. It's one of it is not construction fencing. It's a requirement by all of our regulatory agencies. So if you see that orange fence with a little lip over the top, you know that there's some in species close proximity that we need to watch out for. And we have that on a lot of our projects. But once we get to the end of the project, there's closeout, it includes a punch list to make sure that we have covered everything. Like we'll walk through with a CM firm and they'll make a punch list, which is our final kind of, these things need to be fixed before we'll accept it. And it's kind of almost where we are with the McCosker project. And then when we do that, it's typically once we're done, closed out and accepted, we will have the dedication or in this case, the board tour prior to being completely done, but we wanted to get everyone out there to see it. And then at that point, we'll do a handoff to operations and or stewardship, depending on the group that's going to take over the maintenance and or establishment of plants. And then post that, we do a debriefing where we meet with the project team and sort of go over the wins, losses, and lessons learned for a project. That is a sort of fairly quick summary of how we deliver projects and the phases in which they go. Right now, I'll touch on a couple of the other delivery methods that we're pursuing. So design, bid, build is our typical, which is what I just explained. You're all fairly familiar with our job order contracting program. What that has done is provided us a tool by which we can do some smaller projects. Well, we do large projects with it as well. But what it does is it gives us fixed costs and an indeterminate quantity. So in other words, the projects that we deliver through our job order contracting doesn't mean we need to come to you, the board, every time that we enter into a project. So it allows us a little bit of, we also don't, because we bid competitively the overarching contract on these fixed costs, it gives us, it's like an on-call contractor. So we can move quickly. We're actually looking at utilizing our job order contracting program to maybe address some of the projects that came up in the last storm. So it gives us that flexibility to move quickly and to do some projects that aren't necessarily the design, bid, build method. It is limited to repair and restoration. So we can't do any new projects. That's by law. We can't do new projects with job order contracting. So that's one of that. I mean, it's mostly used for repair and restoration. The picture on the right is them jacketing the piers at Cogswell Marsh. And that one is the job order contracting is one of the best ways that we could deliver that type of project. Lastly, design build. In the end of last year, the state passed AB 2789, which gave the district authorization to utilize design build. Design build is a delivery method in which the agency will take a project to about what they call bridging documents. And if we want to reference kind of how I described it, it would be about the 30% documents in our design, bid, build. And then we would go out it gives us an opportunity to go out for best value in terms of, and it puts, I'm not doing a great job of describing this.
You're doing fine.
The design build will allow us to, as its name implies, we will enter into an agreement with an entity that is usually a designer and a contractor, and they will work together to develop our plans from that 30% and then build the complete project. So that's not to say that we will still oversee the development of that. So it's not giving them carte blanche, but what it does is it gives an efficiency to the designer working with the contractor to figure out the best method and to deliver that method, to deliver whatever they're designing or the project that we want. It's used a lot for big kind of buildings. I think the district's use of it would be, McCosker would have been a great project to use on that, because it would allow a restoration designer to team up with a restoration contractor and sort of flesh that out. Tykert, who did the project at McCosker, is a great contractor. They're typically a road heavy utility contractor. And so we had some learning curves. Again, back to design, bid, build, and getting a lower contractor. They necessarily don't have the skills. So there's a lot of administratively covering and sort of talking them through things that they necessarily don't have experience on. So we're excited about the potential of design build. The legislation states that the board has to adopt that. So there will be a policy coming to you all soon. We're working on that. We would like to get that done because there's a couple of projects in our workload that we would like to try that method out in the next year. So we're hoping to I'm working with Jason in the legal department to verify that policy and get it to you by July. So that will be coming your way. Yes, Director Eccles.
Funding strategies. I just had a question about the change orders. And certainly there's lots of legitimate reasons for needing to process a change order. But sometimes some contractors will, bid low on and basically rely on change orders to make their money. So I'm just wondering how we guard against that.
It's a great question, and you're spot on. That happens more often than we would like. So that's where we've been developing our standard details and our plans and specifications so that they are more enforceable. So that, in other words, those are our binding, those all become part of our contract with that contractor. And so as the plans and specifications are laid out, we've in the process of converting to CSI, we've found, oh, this didn't work. We need to have stronger language here so that it's enforceable when we get to a situation with the contractor. And so to answer your question is that we do our best to make plans and specs that capture everything that we know that is out there. We have a review of those. Again, part of our process is to bring a CM firm on again to look at that before we go out to bid, to make sure that, look for those things that a contractor may see as an opportunity to mark up or try to take advantage of something. So it's a thing. It's part of it. We do our best to sort of ensure that that doesn't happen. Again, that speaks to the value of having our construction inspectors on site while construction happens so that they can look at it. And if they see something amiss, say, hey, this isn't right. This isn't per plan and specs, point it out to them. We work on that constantly. Sure.
Any other board members? Well, I got to say this. I'm very proud of your department. I think the 30 people that you described are incredible professionals, did a great job. I personally would have loved to see, instead of McCosker, which is an incredible, great project, I would have loved to see this scenario with Roberts. Roberts tool, I'm looking at your documents and the stuff you go through here. I understand why it takes 2 years. But, when the statements are like the project management team leads cross-divisional staff reviews, sets documents at the 35% stage, 65%, and 95%. And we go through this saying everything's addressed, permitting, dealing with other jurisdictions who have regulatory control. And Roberts is a case study, and it just didn't work, in my opinion. And then construction is underway, staff attends frequent site meetings, performs inspections. I'm not being critical, and we're all trying to improve here. I just want to sort of know what happened at Roberts, because Roberts was promised at swim season this year over a 2-year period, if I'm not mistaken. And up until the day before it opened, almost, it was still recommended that was going to occur. And then it was this, and then that, and then this, and then that. And it seemed to move around. And some of these, couldn't those things have been addressed? I mean, I don't want to pile on. I'm just hoping that there can be some type of improvement, like liquidated damages, which I don't know about that much, but I know I've used before. It seemed to be an effective way. If we hire a construction manager, I would think that a construction manager would not continue to suggest the project's going to get done, and knowing full well it wouldn't, because we pay them a lot of money. Or maybe there's a way we can integrate our inspectors or project managers to be a little more connected, or maybe even at a board level, because I was told some of these unforeseen things that came up were East Bay mud problems, or with permitting that we didn't foresee. Well, if they, I don't know how, when we review these things at the 35, 65, that they didn't come up, but if they didn't, I think that becomes a political matter. And we do have an East Bay Mud Regional Park District Liaison Committee where we could have addressed this, and we could have used the same thing, the mantra we use every single day is the poor, underserved community we want to serve. Well, what's going to happen in Oakland? I mean, DeQuincy gave a wonderful expression or a talk last Friday at our field trip. I don't know the numbers, I don't remember them, but it was a large number of underserved kids in Oakland that we teach swimming lessons to, and that we provide recreational services for, that seem to be blotted out. And, today I was surprised as heck, or I was surprised when I got our packet today that under capital projects on the last page, we're out onto the, under Roberts, we're going into quarter number 3 and quarter number 4 this year. So there's no swim season this year. According to these documents, and I, from what I saw last week, I don't think there's going to be any swim season. I hope there's one next year, but I think it's a missed opportunity. I hope we really look at this kind of stuff and suggest that, construction managers their job is to plan construction and make sure it happens. So I hope we can do that.
Understood. I hear you, Director Rossby, and I'm happy to talk to you more about this after the study session to go through details on that project specifically. Highlighted it. Toby did a great job, I felt, highlighting it at the board tour last week, and he spoke to some of those issues. I hear that those aren't sound for you. I'll be happy to talk with you after this about certain things. It speaks to the complexities of a lot of projects. And based on that one and trying to deliver it, we make it a practice to try to get all of our permits in hand before we go out to bid, knowing that we were up against a time constraint and we wanted to go out to bid such that we could start construction after the end of a swim season and try to complete it in 1 year, which, if given and looking at this project as being a $12 million project to deliver it in 14 months is pretty adventurous. It's a good turnaround. It's not undue, but we went out to bid without a Department of Environmental Health permit because we wanted to try to make a schedule. As for instance, for one of the issues you brought up, but like I said, we can talk about that after. And to your point, we are learning from this, and we're trying to figure out how to codify and put in procedures that we're learning what we need to add to our specifications and our proposals for construction managers. It's not the same. We don't have plans and specs for construction managers. It's a scope that we have for them. So we're figuring out how to verify and close that in, because we've only been working with construction managers for a few years now. So we're learning as we go. So I hear your disappointment that that's not delivered, but we are making every effort to get it online. And so to that, it does look at up to Q3 and Q4, but we've tried to figure out and get temporary occupancy for that such that we could open it up and then come back after the swim season and can complete some of that work so that we would have some functionality there.
That'd be great.
So add to that, how in the world do you account for the delays and
Microphone.
it's on, just too far away. Thank you. The immensely frustrating delays with Contra Loma, and I've been trying to figure out Contra Loma, and it keeps coming down to unforeseen circumstances at every single stage of how you folks go through a project, from design to construction and finding out that construction isn't going to work, to supply chain issues, and ultimately deciding that it needs an entirely different project than the one you folks set out with. And do you set that aside and do postmortems on how did that happen, so that we're missing several swim seasons out there?
Yes, we have. Contra Loma is another. We are a public agency that has we do park projects. pools are not typically what our design construction department has delivered. So to that end, the pool at Contra Loma, the lagoon at Contra Loma, was designed by the Contra Costa Water District as a way to not swim in the reservoir anymore. So we did not design, or we were part of the building of that. And my understanding is it's had issues from the day one in terms of how it operates and how it moves forward. In 2018 or 2020, we did a needs assessment. So park operations staff has said, and we can talk about this more, but I'll touch on it a little bit since you brought it up, Director Coffey, wanted to get rid of the sand. It caused problems for lots of things in terms of the maintenance of the pool. It was a contributor to the waterproofing not being holding. That's a contributor of many factors. There's expansion points in the shell of that thing. It's sitting above a body of water such that there's hydrostatic pressure. These are things I've learned. It's been inconclusive. So with the repairs that were done with job order contracting when our former chief of public safety said, this is not a safe environment for people to swim because the water was coming, or the waterproofing was coming up, which is a known maintenance issue out there in terms of that's what we'd have to do when we took that on from the facility from Contra Costa Water District, is that we'd have to re-waterproof it every 5 to 10 years. When that happened when we did that and it was shut down, we said, oh, here's an opportunity. We could re-waterproof it. The waterproofing material has changed subsequently that what we used in the past was, and then something had changed that the manufacturer said, you can't use this anymore in chlorinated water. So we then tried to revisit that and go back to it. And to speak to the former delays, that we've then reached out to consultants to say, help us figure out how to do this. And we've gotten non-responses for that. We finally got Aquatic Design Group, who is the designer. Because we've reached out and agreed that, we've gotten them back on board. So now we're engaging with them to make the improvements that were part of the needs assessment. So in other words, to remove the sand, there's a structure in the bottom of the lagoon that needs the sand. It's taken time to get anybody to help us to do this work, because we can't just go out to bid and fix this without having plans and specifications, and no one on staff has the expertise to do that.
So this is the example of sometimes you can't just put it in a process. The process is just not going to work.
I don't want to argue that one. We spend millions upon millions of dollars for the best engineers in the world who know exactly what they're doing to engineer a project. Then we spend millions and millions of dollars on construction managers to make sure the project goes like it's supposed to go. People get it done. I understand. That's what a construction manager is there for unforeseen conditions. So you keep the thing running. Get permits when you need the permits. Find out what permits you need beforehand. But I will discuss it later. I just would hope for I hope we could open some pools for kids.
We hope that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. In the home stretch now officially. This is the last topic on the item.
Do we need a break?
Do we need a break?
Let's take a 10-minute break.
Yes.
You are good to go.
All right, thank you. Rim, thank you. Our now last section, I hope.
Welcome back. There we go. We are in the last section. I have a couple of slides and then I'll turn it over to Deborah Ocker, Chief or AGM of Finance and Management Services, to follow up. So we've talked about prioritization, we've talked about delivery. Now we're going to talk a little bit about funding strategies and kind of historically how we've done it, and the reasons of why we want to make some of these improvements to the CIP and prioritization. Let's see, there we go. So currently or historically, the district we've done partial funding kind of at each phase. And when we come back, we've gotten away from this in the last year or so as trying to put in money to budgets at the budget process on an annual basis. But in the past, we have come to the board and we've come to the action we've usually done and appropriate and transfer so that we can then proceed with that scope of work. That has been our method in the past. It's worked. We do a lot of projects with other people's money or grants. To that end, that's not going to go away. There's no way we could deliver all this work without other people's money. And I think other people want to help us to deliver these projects because they don't have the bandwidth or the staff or the ability to do it. And we have the land on which to do some of these things. Anyway, so that's not going away. But what we're suggesting is, and historically we've done, or how we spend money is most restrictive funds to general funds. And so by that, what I mean is a grant fund is specifically for that project. So it's very restrictive because we can't use those funds anywhere else. So we go from those types of funds all the way up to our general fund. And in between, there's funds that, aside from grant funding, we have funding like the MERP fund, which is 553, which we use sometimes to then allocate money that is less restrictive. And then but at the end, when we don't have any funding, we'll come back to you and say, we need some general fund. And then usually it's hopefully in the fact that this is only to get us a grant and we'll reimburse with the grant money later. But typically we know that general funds are stretched thin. Anyway, it's proven effective, but it's not always, it's driven by external values. I mean, we share values with lots of these folks, but from a project delivery point of view, sometimes we've changed projects that seem to be higher priority to other ones because of the grant money that's available. So to revisit the topic that came up last time about WW, and as an example for this, I have Roberts Pool. So the WW, as a reminder, there was a discussion of aggregating those funds into metros. From a project delivery and development point of view, using Roberts as an example, Roberts had 1.35 million allocated as part of the Measure WW. We're approaching a project that's going to be almost $12 million. What this highlights, this is an extreme case, but what it highlights is that the WW line items don't necessarily, and I don't believe we're set up to be fully funded as projects. Add to this, that measure was approved in 2008, and we've had subsequent major cost escalation in that time. And so what we're facing is a voter approved list of projects that potentially don't have enough funding for them. So by aggregating WW funds from the development side, it'll allow the district to deliver on those projects that are maybe not grant worthy and put those monies into those projects, and then take the projects that are more appealing to grants and leverage money that way. So in terms of project development, that's just an example as to why, and to rethink about, or as you process the proposal of aggregating WW funds, that's from the development side. For summary of mine, portion, and then I'll turn it over to Deborah, is project delivery is effective, but we have a desire to make it more efficient with the process for prioritization. We're successful and we want to continue that, and we want to be able to do that. So that gets us to our ribbon cutting ceremonies that everybody loves, and it then shows us delivering on our projects. And that's when we typically hand projects off, and accordingly, I'm going to hand it off to Deborah to talk about more funding information.
Good afternoon. Deborah Ocker, Assistant General Manager of Finance and Management Services. And thank you so much, Ren, for pretty much covering everything. I only have like 4 slides to highlight some of the things. But first, I want to just mention that I did ask my 2 assistant finance officers to join us today. Jeff Rasmussen oversees management services and grants, and Deb Spalding oversees finance and budgeting. And we are really here to support this team. We spend a lot of time on the front end of budgeting, and then a lot of time with funding strategies and seeking funds for grants and just helping with regulatory requirements. So we are really, truly here to support this team with all the complexities to do our best to make it easier for them. So we work very closely together. And just to give a little bit of high level information. So we talked a lot about at the beginning of this meeting, the prioritization process, which is still new for us. But we have your final prettied up adopted budgets for you to take with you today. And in there, in the front of the project budget are all of the active major capital projects. As Ren talked about, there's just under 100 that we have considered major capital projects. In the program section, there's tons of other projects back there that we're still working on, but these are the major. So out of these major, we did rank them. And you can see on the pie chart here, out of last year's ranking, 38% were deemed to be essential projects, just because we have a lot of maintenance projects out there that we're working on, that we're prioritizing. And then 35% were in that mid-range of the ranking for capital project prioritization from about 46 to 90. There's 35% of those. 14% on the very high end, above 90 is their score, and 13%. So the chart is actually not too bad, but this is just looking at it this way as a way for us to track some high level financial data so we can measure our progress. So this is just a snapshot in time. And as we mentioned with the prioritization, it is our goal to re-look at these projects every year because new information comes up. As we mentioned, the equity scoring gets updated annually by these outside agencies. So we will be able to refine things as we go forward. It's not just one score and that's it. So those were our top projects. Also, we talked a little bit about who does these projects. So in all of our capital project active budgets, design and construction is tasked with the majority of these projects throughout the district. We have MAST doing some and finance and management services as the other big unit that's working on these. In this current year budget, we have expanded MAST and added a project management unit. And so they'll be able to take on more MAST projects and kind of take them away from finance and management services. We've done some of those projects specifically when they're related to grants, disaster FEMA stuff, and some of our other maintenance projects. So we'll be trying to shift those slowly but surely over to the MAST group. Sometimes they end up in design and construction when they're super complex. But you can see that we are, in some ways, lots of divisions are doing projects. So us collaborating and coordinating and all of us getting together using this new criteria is really important. That's why all the chiefs are involved. And then another slide of where does the money come from? So of our active capital projects, you can see here that half of the funding comes from district funds. And then 22% comes from our bond program, mainly for this development side. This is only development I'm talking about. I'm not talking about land acquisition. And so 22% comes from WW bonds, 24% from grants, and 2% from other. Now, I think when I look at this chart, there may be a little bit more on the green side than we're used to. And I will attribute that to the fact that we have now been funding our major maintenance program. We've been in very good shape. The board adopted a major maintenance funding policy a couple of years ago, and we have been putting funding aside, and we've been able to use that. So we're matching our grant funds and our bond funds with our major maintenance funding. I knew there was a question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, that calls attention to the question of this green portion being a larger piece of the pie than normally we have, as you're suggesting. And I'm wondering if on the prior slide, when you have a very large part of the pie being a slice allocated from or to essential projects, do both of these reflect the fact that we have been or are or will be, because I'm just thinking of the time frame, dealing with these massive storm damage issues where, there might not be FEMA money to pay for them right away, and we're using general funds or we're using reserves or however that funding is. It strikes me that these will take up a big piece of the pie for projects abnormally, and that we ought to know that in the back of our heads.
There are still 2017 storm projects. We've been working with FEMA to get approval for many of the big projects, the landslides, the very big ones that require permitting. And so those are in there. To be honest, in this active projects, there are none from the current storm. Just
This
so you know.
is last year, so
So yeah, this
prior
is
years.
last year's numbers. So, but it is something to think about. And I think one of Ren's points is that things come at us at all angles. And when we do have emergency work or things that are, requiring immediate, to be immediately addressed, it might change the work plan throughout the year of what you had planned might be shifted. So that's a very good point to make.
Will you count FEMA funding in which part of the pie?
That will be in the grants part of the pie because the projects that we're putting forward for FEMA at this point are the ones that are fully funded by FEMA. So in this pie, they're in the grant section.
And I just wanted, that just triggered something for me really quickly. I just wanted to say, and I have not spoken to staff about this, so it's the first time they've heard this. But in some other jobs that I've had before, I've actually pivoted to have a little bit more of like having an on-call strike team internally, knowing that every year you're going to just, and especially here, you're going to have unexpected things. There's going to be, or they're the expected unexpecteds, right? Emergencies. And so something that this is not a this year thing, but something I do want us to talk about, which is creating a structure so that when we do have the drought or the fires, the floods, whatever it is, it's going to come to us, that it doesn't take our staff away from all of the existing current projects that they're working on. So that is a model that I've used before, not quite ready to do that here, but it just to foreshadow, it's something I think that we probably should start to talk about.
And when we do that, include as an element in those considerations, how it's going to use our general funds.
And have those emergency
Or
funds.
at what point do you use reserves anticipating FEMA? Those kind of questions keep swirling my mind as I see it, all the damage that
Year
we
after
have
year.
right now.
Yeah.
To that point, I think we can expect more of the unexpected. I mean, we're having so many different weather extreme type of events. So, and maybe to allocate the funds towards that. So it's already there from the general fund. I'm not sure, but that might also be something to consider as part of this program.
Right. And our grants team is meeting regularly. They have monthly meetings with all of these different departments as they're saying, what are the projects that you are bringing online? How can we support you in these different areas of funding? One of the things that we find very important to repeat over and over again is that we only get paid for the grants where we actually complete the work. And this district has been very successful because we work as a team and we try to make sure we fully understand the grant requirements, the budgets that they're covering, and work with the project managers to get those grants, meet the deadlines. We apply for a lot of extensions because the granting agencies know we will deliver and they understand that things do happen in projects. So we put in lots of scope revisions. It's an ongoing process on the grant side. And I guess just to touch on what Ren shared about his, from the implementation perspective of should we consolidate WW development funds or leave them in their individual allocation areas, grants can, it's a complexity and certain projects are excellent at getting grant funds and other projects that we have, there's just not a strong likelihood that we're going to be successful in this competitive world of grants. And so Ren's perspective is let's put the money where we need it. And so, the design and construction perspective is if we have more flexibility by consolidating the WW development money and going after grants for 100% of the projects for, say, restoration or other ones that are just out there where there's lots of funding available, that might help us move things forward. So that was just my pitch of what Ren was trying to explain. And then just my last slide is really not as informative, but when we, like Ren said, we've had a practice here of putting money aside for projects, lots of money in lots of different buckets, and not necessarily relating those budgets to the true project cost. We would just say we only need $200,000 to get started this year. And we'll come back to the board later when we have more information. So we really are truly telling you, we're going to try to shift that. And there's going to be some pain points in it. One of the pain points is when we do develop this more robust CIP, we're going to have a document that shows you very clearly all the unfunded projects we have, right? In the past, we had it packaged up with a bow on it and we said, here, we found all the money and here's the bid and we're ready to go, right? And the board's like, oh, that's perfect. Well, we're going to bring you into the pain of here's the project and the trail project that costs, $10 to $15 million and we don't have the money. It's going to be in our CIP. And so you're going to know that we're still seeking that funding and we will work towards it, but it's going to show a negative. And then the other thing that we haven't really talked about yet, which is going to be really important for us to talk about, is total project cost estimates. When you put together a CIP of something that's not going to happen for a while, your estimate is only based on the information you have today. It's not the information when you're going to go to bid. So there's going to be a need for you to understand that the project cost, the estimates we put forward, are going to change with every phase. And I have seen other agencies that have policies that explain that. When you're at 30%, you have an estimate. And then when you get to 50%, you change the estimate. And so that also speaks to Ren saying, as we get information from permits and regulatory agencies, the cost changes. And so you just have to know that that's going to be part of this process, something new that we haven't done before. In the past, we said, here's the cost, and we try to stick to it as much as possible. So those were just kind of some of the highlights. This slide just shows that we have active projects of almost 300 million when we're just looking at kind of our active capital projects for this budget year. And half of that money has been spent already. As you know, we have multi-year projects. They cover, 10 to 15, or 5 to 10 years sometimes to get them done. So we have plenty of money out there for some of the projects that we have. So that concludes my section. Ken, you were going to do a few highlights. Do you want me to bring this slide down? You don't have another slide. You can do it.
All right, hold on. Let me get the slide up here. Oh. No, I'm just going to.
Just a couple of comments. One is I like the idea of having an emergency room, but I think in the field it kind of happens organically. I mean, historically, if a particular park has a lot of damage, then usually the unit manager has some leeway in pulling in people from their unit to chip in, and sometimes they do that as a budget as well. But it would be nice to me, our reserve is exactly just for that, so we should be able to carve out some of that money for when our units get hit really hard on the ground, that the unit managers and operations has that access to that money so that they can fix those things that get broken. So I think it's in context, a great concept. And then regarding the total cost estimates, I really love that because when you look at Peralta Oaks North, we thought we were in the neighborhood after spending the 12 or 14 million that we used to purchase the money or the building. We thought all we needed was another 20 million, and then we get hit with a $90 million project. So I really like that too. And then regarding WW, we do have a 25% contingency that the board has access to, and is that restricted? I think it's not restricted to metros or anything. We can use that. I think that should be made available to fund projects that we think are deserving.
The Measure WW reserve is 7% of the 375 million. There's about just over 20 million remaining, and it does not have restrictions. It can be used on either acquisition or development. It can be used in any metro.
Great. So just thank you for that clarification.
Thank you very much. In closing, what I want to do is I'm sorry.
I actually wanted to go back to the idea of this total cost of construction. Is that what we used? Because I see a lot of what we're doing is we're looking at like project by project, which in my mind, I always think of that as like a bottoms up approach in terms of total cost, but there can also be like a top down approach. And the only reason I bring this up is, I used to work at Autodesk, and one of my jobs at, a big construction software company. And one of my jobs was to actually track construction costs and how much construction is going to grow, just big picture overall construction. But that also can give us a sense, because you can do that by geographic area. So just to see how cost of construction in the San Francisco Bay Area might potentially grow or is estimated to grow. And that could also give us a sense of, we might have in our CIP that a project might be $45 million to complete, but when we actually go to construct it in 2 or 3 years, it could increase to something like 65 million. So I don't know if there's some sort of like variable that we could use just to have that estimate. If we wait to start a construction project, it might end up costing more down the road.
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And what we've learned or what we're doing as a practice is putting an escalation for years. Once we have done that, we've put in like 5% for the past few years. So in other words, if we get to a project and we know that we're not going to go to build for 2 more years, we'll take the engineer's estimate and we'll apply 5% on an annual basis to get us to that project full, or what we think that estimate will be at that time. So we are doing that now. I think that's a great point. I think, and again, we start large with a conservative estimate. And then as we get details, we refine that and hopefully get lower, but it depends on if there's more constraints or more costs that are incurred because of that. So I think that's a great point, and we will start to do that. I mean, we'll continue to do that.
Thank you for those great questions. Any other questions? All right. I have questions. The last 3 questions. I brought this slide back up. We started this discussion with these questions in mind, and I know we've been capturing your input and your feedback, in which we greatly appreciate it. Just like I said in the beginning, when we know better, we do better. So I wanted to go through these questions one more time and facilitate if there's any additional thoughts on the capital project prioritization criteria that the board approved last year in August. I know we've captured some of that. I know we talked about the equity and access amongst other things. So if there's any other points the board members wanted to share.
Any comments, questions?
No.
Member Corbett.
On questions like these, I may come up with some more ideas in my head someday.
Of course. And of course, you guys know in my email address, I can always.
Okay. But I did do on number 3, what are your thoughts on aggregating WW development funds? I do need to know a little bit more about that, but I'm guessing or assuming that if we did start moving this WW money around, it might do what has done earlier, is move things out of various districts. And so some districts end up with less funding and some districts end up with a whole bunch of funding. And that's already the case. So that's something that I think we should, take a look at and listen to people's opinions on it and make sure we're fair and we're doing the right thing. And that's not necessarily easy.
Right.
Because some districts just have more parkland and areas and some have less. So, but I do believe it should be very as fair as we can be between districts.
Most definitely.
And I don't have a total answer for you on that yet. Thank you.
And I wanted to maybe put a little sub part on that third question. So at the land study session, we ended that, if you recall, where you all gave us general consensus that you'd like us to go through the exercise of exactly what Director Corbett mentioned, which is looking at that project list. And if we were to go forward with our recommendation on the consolidation into the 3 metros, what it would actually look like in real life. And so the third question there, I just want to, again, if you have additional thoughts on that, we have the understanding now that you do want us to go through and do that exercise. If you don't, tell us now. It's a lot of work. But if there are other parts of that that you want us to go through, let us know. Deborah, am I capturing that correctly for you? Okay. All right. Right.
I'm not clear what the exercise is you just described.
So in the land session, we had taught, our recommendation was to consolidate instead of having that. Maybe you want to go through the specifics of it, the way that the measure was written, and the fact that the board does have the discretion to do the consolidation away from the projects.
That I understand. My question was, is part of the exercise actually looking at how this would shift money around from wards and metros?
It is, yeah.
Well, Director,
It should be.
we're at the point still where we are tasked with balancing the metros. So it's really taking any allocation area that's in the Diablo Metro and grouping all of that money that's remaining left and giving you a list of all the projects that are still remaining, and say, instead of looking at just park by park, let's look at the whole Diablo Metro, see how much money there is, see what projects are remaining, and then say like, oh, some of these projects you can get really good grant money for. Some of them, you're not going to be so successful with grants in the next couple of years based on what we know. So we can just kind of shift where we use it rather than only using what was originally, earmarked for that park, that allocation area. So that was the exercise we were going to go through. And at the same time, we were going to try to bring the board anything where we've said, you know what, we can't do this. Like it was decided in, the 80s. And it's just something that either we don't see feasible or we don't think we want it anymore, and bring those conversations back to the board for discussion as well.
Not much I understand. What it gets to what Director Corbett is raising, that to me would have to be interjected into this whole process. And that is that our prioritization for projects, both in the past and as presented here, doesn't take into account wards, and it doesn't take into account metros. WW takes into account, and AA took into account specific locations, site-specific locations for projects, which we then went out and advertised, this is what we're going to do with your money. But there isn't any existing prioritization for wards or metros in the capital projects process. And it would actually be an interesting exercise to do that. I've never felt the compulsion that much. I can look at this map that we have in our board packet, and it's mostly Alameda County in terms of the actual percentage that we're allocating toward existing projects in here. Yeah.
Director Coffey, I think in the master plan, it does speak to, equitable distribution of resources. And the staff has always known that that was a priority, equitable distribution of resources. And it did state by metro, not by ward. So that's in the master plan. And then also at our last, when we adopted this capital projects prioritization criteria last year, I recall Director Lane did ask that question. Well, how do we balance the wards? And I think Lisa Boldinger responded by saying, in some cases, the equity question helps because it's saying these are the areas where there is need. These are the areas that the equity points are saying, these are the areas that are going to get high ratings because there's a lot of need. And they are distributed throughout the entire East Bay. There's not a single ward that doesn't have, areas of need of underserved communities. So that was just, it's something we probably need to look at going forward, but that's the shift we're trying to make.
I want to point out, to the extent there is metro equity in the allocation of resources in our master plan, when it comes to prioritization, this new policy that's being presented here for capital projects, that shows up in item 10, which gets a whole 5 points. So again, I'm keep coming back to, are we going to interject into this process of as an express concept of some form of equity, ward allocation or metro allocation in these. Right now, if you look at this map in here, Ward 6 doesn't have a lot of little dots in it. And I'm happy with the process. I'm not arguing that Contra Costa gets necessarily short shift in this. But I just suspect that it would take a significant effort to interject that into this process. And were we to do that, I would be all in favor. And this is going to combine question 1 and 3 is to what role we place the master plan and WW allocations into this process. And I think I argued last year that it was worth more than 5 points. But that's where it's at now in terms of this ward allocation.
Well, if I might add, it's as always, and it's nobody's fault, but we're now 4 minutes away from closing this meeting down. And now I think it's an incredibly important question. That number 3 is a big question that, as you know, at our last board meeting, we had lots of members of the public saying promises made, promises kept. And if we ever look for getting another bond measure, in my opinion, if we need to take this into consideration. It's more than just all the things we're saying here. It's a political question. And I think you need to include the political people in it, and not with 4 minutes left in a meeting. I think we need to set aside time to deal with this one question because it's very, very important in my opinion.
Yeah, I would also like to have some clarification around what the bond language exactly says, because it was my understanding that this is what we advertised how we were going to spend the money. And I'm not 100% clear whether we really, I want to know exactly how much discretion we have. I want to see the language because I think, if the language doesn't really provide us, maybe you've already looked at it and you say that it does provide us with this discretion. But if it doesn't say that, then I don't see the point in going down this path.
Yes, Director Eccles, I'm putting together a memo to respond to the land sessions questions, and I'll run it by legal, and then we can bring you the copies of the ordinances and our analysis of how clearly it defines that question.
Can I add to that list?
Sure. Yeah.
That we're building for some future session that I think is really important because I agree with the importance of that question. I mean, there are already people who are giving us calls and saying, you could get sued for doing this. At what point is it recognized that a particular expenditure that may have this big star on it on the map that we associated with WW isn't feasible anymore? Or there isn't enough time to do that left in the bond issue. And so that ability to spend money that just isn't going to be spent according to that 2008 map because of feasibility, where do we have discretion in that realm too? And I understand this is something bigger than off the question.
Yes, Director Coffey, typically bond measures are written in such a way that there's a list of projects that are kind of proposals for how that bond money will be spent. And usually the amount of the bond isn't enough to actually fund all of those projects. And so there isn't any kind of legal remedy if you don't actually do them all.
Spend it.
Well, whether or not you choose to actually fund the bonds, in which is what triggers the taxes from residents, is one thing. But we do have to look at the exact language of WW, which I haven't seen yet, but we'll be looking at that. But typically, there's way more in the bond measure in terms of what's included for projects than could ever actually be completed. So there is discretion here by this board to pick and choose and prioritize. And it's very, very common that projects that were included in one bond measure carry over into another because of that recognition that they can't all be funded. And especially because this bond measure was several years ago, costs have changed. So voters are not going, they wouldn't have any legal reason to try to say you promised this. That's not how it works. There's a political question that Director Waspy is raising, but again, there's no way you can complete all of the projects listed in
So, but what
WW.
if we wanted to complete a different project? So to what extent, if we have X millions of dollars set aside for site A, and we decide at some point, and I'm guessing we have some discretion at some point to decide that project A site isn't going to get done under WW, let's allocate it to site B, which is also on WW's map. That's the kind of discretion I'm wondering what and when and how we have it.
Typically, you have the bond measure, and that's approved by voters, and it has language that says this is kind of a list of things that we might spend the bond on. And it usually will have language that says, and other projects as directed by the board. So that's where you have the wiggle room. And then typically you have a resolution allocating that bond money.
Mhm.
And it doesn't necessarily allocate all of it at all the time, but you have discretion to change your mind. And even though you do a resolution, you can amend or actually do a new resolution that says we're reallocating. And the public has a process. They get to come and comment on your reallocation.
That's a very good point, because that answers some of the political objection to your changing it. And your answer is good for me, because I'm hoping we do have that kind of discretion.
Right. And again, I'm speaking generally about how this process works.
I appreciate what President Waspy said, that we have another meeting, so we have an opportunity to discuss some of these issues that we really should as a group. And two of the issues that would be important to discuss, of course, would be the future of funding, and if there's any opportunities to increase funding abilities. We talked about this a year or two ago. I remember having this conversation with other board members. And, maybe it's time to start thinking about a way to raise a little more money for certain projects. So I just throw that out there, something we talked about doing, and then it sort of just went away for a while. So I hope we do that. And then also have a document that shows, and there's a document, all of us have seen it, the document that shows how much land, how much revenue goes to district, and what a difference it is from district to district. The amount of land and property there in each district, and the amount of funding that goes towards them. I know you've all seen it, of course. That always hurts me a little bit when I look at that list. But that should be something that we should discuss in that next meeting. President Waspy.
I just wanted to address a comment made by Director Coffey. These projects, when you look at them, they're all concentrated in parks that are older parks. So it's mostly infrastructure, and then you have a lot of open space, and newer parks, and so you're going to get yours later. Yeah. So I just wanted to make that point. Is like when you look at the dots, it's all concentrated in our older parks. So
yeah, so it's clear I wasn't objecting to it,
yeah,
because
okay.
I kind of understand that's going in. What I was pointing out is we take into account that sort of distinction between our sectors, our regions, and all. And I would expect that there would be more balance towards projects in the older sectors and regions than in the
good.
That makes perfect sense.
And then the other point I wanted to make is as far as allocations. I mean, there was we were when I was a park supervisor, I can't remember, it was the early 2000s, and park supervisors were tasked with looking at the projects that were submitted for WW and saying which ones are doable and which ones are not. If you don't think they are doable, take them off the list. So we went through that exercise as the park supervisors. I took a bunch of stuff off of that I couldn't get permits for. So like there was a lot of trail realignments that I was told never going to get permits for those. I had bridges that I wanted constructed, equestrian pedestrian bridges. You're not going to get permits for those. So I took those off the list. So there was
And hopefully you redirected them, right?
The money wasn't, those projects just fell off the list. And then I'm sure all the park supervisors did similar, and those projects went bye-bye. So, yeah, so I think there is some we certainly exercise it as a district on the field level. So I think, it's not, for me, it's not that much of a jump to think that we have some discretion on some of the bigger projects. So just some historical content.
All right. Thank any.
So whenever we do review this next, or maybe in the memo, on page 6 in the memo we received for today, there's at the last paragraph, there's the trade-off comment about the number of projects that can be done with the development funds available and the number of projects on the WW list. So I think that's good to just continue to flesh out a little bit more. So we're saying the development funds, that's what's used for CIP projects, but then WW list is more for acquisition potentially, or we can't use it. So I think just to spell that out a little bit more would be helpful for me. I know we've been having this conversation both this session and the previous session, but then that's the one that I had underlined that I just wanted to explore a bit more.
There's a portion of WW that goes to land acquisition. And then today we're talking more about that 25% that was set aside for development projects. So yes, we can flush that out and go over that. A lot to absorb.
That's just what I had highlighted. And then I do think it's helpful to look at, the different projects, maybe cut a number of different ways, whether it's by metro, whether it's by ward, whether it's by county. But the other point I was going to make is, just because we have these different segmentations, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the park that someone's going to use. So for example, I know before the 2020 census, I believe Ardenwood was in Ward 5 and Wies Camp was the director of that. But then because of the census and because really a population growth in a place like Dublin, the lines changed, but I think the line's right on the street at Ardenwood. And honestly, I think if you live in Fremont, there's a lot of pride in Ardenwood. That doesn't matter if you're in one ward versus another. I think people do enjoy going to Ardenwood, and not just in Fremont, but like in the greater East Bay. And then I also can think about, for myself, when I think about, San Ramon and Danville, while that might not be in Ward 5, I mean, certainly I frequently go to the parks there and go to those cities. And so those are also, and I think I could even extend that out to on the other side, with like Morgan Territory and Round Valley, that's not that far from where I live. So those, we can't just completely segment by ward because, some people might live closer to another park or prefer a different park. So those are just some things to consider as we're going through this.
Yes, all excellent points, which I am sure, hopefully, or I'm not sure, I hope you'll all agree. We probably need to talk about this a little more and in another session like this. And I hope we can do that because there's lots of questions and this is a big, big deal for the Park District. So is that it, Ken?
Yes, thank you very much.
Very much, staff, for the great presentations today. Thank you all for being here. Ellen, you have to leave. If you could listen, can anybody listen for one more minute? And this is me going off Easter. I'm told it's okay. We're having lots of issues with meeting dates that we need to have, committee meeting dates, times, things like that. It's come to my attention. I was supposed to make the ruling on this, which I never knew before this job, but staff can't just at our whim change. We need, in my opinion, and I think we need to discuss this, in my opinion, and if I do have the president's whatever, I'm going to suggest, I couldn't pronounce it. I was going to impress something. We need to get together. I don't care how you do it. I don't care. But when you meet in your committees, let's suggest that for the end of the year, you're going to meet at a certain time and at a certain date. And that's it for the end of the year. That gives staff the ability to plan their lives, and we should consider their lives too, by the way. But when it's decided, We all meet once a month. So in this next month, for the next 7 months or whatever it's going to be till the end of the year, let's all meet at that date. We all have alternates. Everybody's got an alternate. I perceive that to be nothing but an opportunity. I haven't been on the operations committee for a million years. I think I'm the alternate this year. Or maybe I'm just, well, let's say I am. Nobody check. I would love to have one of you guys miss the operations committee and invite me in. I think it's good experience for everybody to move around, especially some of the younger people that are moving into positions of the finance committee that aren't there and the executive committee, which is always fascinating to show up as an alternate. So my ask for you all is we can do this together at another meeting, or whomever is the chair of whichever committee should meet at the next meeting and say, do we all agree that Tuesday at 11 o'clock is the meeting time for the rest of the year? And then maybe if it doesn't work, that's why you have alternates. And I think I love the procedure. I love the way we used to do it, where Yolanda in December says, Elizabeth, you have the task of assigning committees. And we're going to make it easier for you by sending out this request to which committee you want to be on. And then we all wait around until beg you to turn it in on time. But that's neither here nor there. And once we do that, I think we should get together. And so you're going to assign chairs and things like that. And sometimes they're just official. Then that group should get together, not just to send in a mail. But once you find out which committees you're on, figure it out for a year. Make it a little easier on staff. I know as you all see your calendars coming off with different dates and days, this meeting today, we don't have to discuss, but that was one of the points of contention. We heard 2 different times from 2 very reliable, good people. It was weird. So let's try not to have it as weird if we can. So if that makes sense, great. If not, thanks.
I just say, it would be nice to have that conversation earlier in the year, because some of those times were set a year or a couple of years ago, and some committees had moved them, and all committees didn't get a chance to say, well, how about it works better if our meeting happens at this time for the rest of the year.
I think that's probably, I didn't articulate it correctly, but that's what I wanted. I hope in December we can get together as the new committees form and say, here's how it's going to go into 2024.
And keep them.
And keep it.
Right.
Yeah. I definitely agree with setting the times and keeping them, no matter what. But it may be helpful just as a starting point for staff to do like a draft schedule, because I'm just imagining all these committees getting together and deciding times and, but maybe we can work off something. Like if staff can say, okay, here's what we think makes sense. And then each committee decides whether they're going to commit to that date or find another one inside in some sort of existing structure, just a process.
Agreed. And I think we brought that up, like keeping, one of the theories was, or proposals was, keep Tuesdays open. Keep Tuesdays open. That was prop. I had that.
Dave Wrenchy's on.
Yeah, that's Dave Wrenchy. Keep Tuesdays open so that committee meetings or extra meetings can be Tuesdays. But, once again, we don't want to go too deep into this, do we, Lynn? Go ahead, Ellen.
That was a help me out here.
I just wanted to say that, we should all be very sensitive to the issues and things that our board members sometimes have to have schedules a certain way because of whatever's going on in their lives, and could start that at the beginning of the year. And I know also we like to pay attention to our staff too and what works for them, not just like one or the other. But at the beginning of the year, try to find out what those schedules are. Makes sense. Because some of them are just left over from past years and nobody asked the incoming folks, does this work?
I think we should get together and investigate any and all options.
Yeah. Thank you.
Director Waspy.
I just wanted to say too that, it's not just for staff and the board, it's also public. The public has expectations when we publish that, they have lives too. But the other thing I wanted to say too is that if we start meetings prior, I know we're talking about starting at 11, but I really think it's important that if we start before lunch, that we allow a half hour so that staff can take lunch. I do not like having staff work through their lunch period to accommodate the board. So lunch is important. I mean, that's why there's federal laws about lunches. And so I really want to make sure that if we do start, if the committees start before like 10 or 11, that you incorporate a lunch break.
Well, thank you so much. And if I may, Director Waspy and board members, I appreciate the conversation and the discussion that's being had here. And we do want to be attentive to the public's availability to participate. And we have new technology that would allow greater engagement by the public. Also, the labor laws, we certainly want to be in adherence with labor law, and appreciate your interest in making sure that staff does have time to eat. And also understanding that we want to provide a beginning point of conversation with a suggested calendar that board members can react to. That gives a little bit of structure. And certainly the reminders that we need to avail ourselves of the tool that's already in place, embedded within your board operating guidelines, to rely on the alternate. So all those pieces will be coming to you sooner rather than later, and not in January of the 2024, but rather closer to the fall of 2023 of this year, to get ready for 2024. And I also want to tell you, I know that the staff is here to support the board members, and we are available to do the business of the public in front of the public based on your availability and based on what we have agreed to. Having said that, I appreciate that Director Waspy is having to step in on a couple of occasions in trying to accommodate circumstances that are difficult. So I appreciate that you kept having to see the work that is being done by staff, and certainly flexibility and cooperation goes a long, long way. Having said that, we're going to try to narrow the opportunities for the remaining of 2023 and having to move any more meetings around. That's the goal, because we want to be respectful of all the pieces that I already mentioned, and respectful of the commitments that we have already made. Yeah.
Thank you. So if there's no further comment on that, we are still in session, and our next item is public comments. So are there members of the public on Zoom or here that would like to speak to the board?
I don't see anybody with their Zoom hand up. There are no public comments in the room, I do not believe. Nope.
Great. If there's nothing for the good of the order, thanks again for today, and we are adjourned.